Hi guys, and welcome to Just About Earth, the corner of the internet where curiosity gets comfortable, and science slows down just enough for wonder to breathe. Tonight we're chasing a question that whispers beneath every blueprint, every brick, every story we think we already understand. What if we're not the first? Not 10,000 years ago, but maybe tens or even hundreds of thousands of years ago. What if another civilization rose, thrived, and vanished long before our timeline even began? And what if traces of it are still here, not in museums, but hiding in plain sight, in myths, in forgotten stones, in anomalies the textbooks skip? It's unsettling, isn't it? We like to picture history as a straight line. Caves, pyramids, empires, skyscrapers us. But what if that's just the shallow surface of a story far deeper? What if the Earth remembers more than we do? Maybe, under the oceans, under the deserts, under our own feet, rest the quiet fingerprints of a world erased by time. So tell me, where are you listening from tonight? A dark room? A quiet bed? Somewhere the world finally feels still? The idea that something came before us isn't new. It lives in legends, in whispers from the past, in the way so many ancient stories begin not with once upon a time, but with long before our people there were others. Archaeologists, geologists, and curious minds have always found that phrase intriguing, because every time we dig a little deeper, literally or figuratively, we find that the line between myth and history isn't as sharp as we once thought. We often mark the beginning of civilization with Sumer around 6,000 years ago. Writing, cities, agriculture, organized governance, but what if that was just the latest reboot in a longer cycle? Every few decades, a new discovery challenges our sense of what's possible. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, for example, overturned a major assumption when it was found to be over 11,000 years old. Built by hunter-gatherers long before agriculture, with stone pillars carved and arranged in intricate, deliberate ways, it shouldn't have existed according to our old timelines. But there it is, real, heavy, weathered, and patient. Discoveries like that make scientists wonder how many other sites might still be waiting beneath sediments, disguised as natural formations, or swallowed by rising seas. Earth is good at hiding things. Volcanoes, floods, and shifting tectonic plates constantly rewrite the landscape. In a few thousand years, even our biggest cities could vanish under forests, deserts, or oceans, leaving only puzzling traces for whoever comes next. So if something advanced existed tens of thousands of years ago, would we even recognize it today? When we imagine a lost civilization, our minds go to myths, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. Those names echo through cultures worldwide, each telling a similar story in its own language. A golden age, a great flood, a fall into the sea, a memory of people who had knowledge beyond their time. It's tempting to dismiss these as symbolic tales, but myths often carry more than metaphor. They carry fragments of memory, passed down through generations until the original event is long gone, and only the story remains. Geologists know that at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. Vast coastal plains vanished. Entire regions that were once habitable are now underwater. If humanity had built settlements there, even small, organized ones, they'd be lost beneath the waves now. The continental shelves around the world are dotted with odd formations, terraces, and structures that spark debate. Some are natural, sculpted by water and time. Others, like the underwater ruins off Yonaguni in Japan, or the submerged stone walls near Malta, invite deeper questions. Are these remnants of early architecture or coincidences of erosion? It's hard to say, but the more we map the ocean floor, the more anomalies we find. Imagine walking across a landscape that's older than memory, feeling the faint pattern of human hands in the stone. Lines carved not for art, but for meaning. What were they trying to say? What would they think of us, building towers of glass and metal, measuring time with satellites, yet still puzzling over their silent works? The idea that knowledge could cycle, that civilization might not be a straight line but a repeating pattern, humbles us. It reminds us that progress isn't permanent. It's fragile, like sand piled high, until a single wave smooths it out again. The earth doesn't preserve everything evenly. Organic materials vanish quickly. Wood, fabric, even metal can erode or oxidize beyond recognition. Stone, on the other hand, endures. That's why the oldest clues we find tend to be carved or built from it. When archaeologists uncover megalithic sites, vast stone circles, pyramids and terraces that predate written history, they often wonder not just how they were built, but why. There's a sense of deliberate design that transcends survival. Someone long ago wanted to communicate with time itself, to make something that would last beyond them. Maybe that's the most human impulse of all. Even our modern world might one day reduce to scattered stones. Concrete crumbles, steel rusts, plastics degrade. If future archaeologists examined the ruins of a modern city 100,000 years from now, what would they conclude? They might find concrete foundations, but not our language, our technology, or our stories. They'd see patterns, grids, alignments, geometry, but not necessarily understand their purpose. The same way we puzzle over the ruins of our ancestors, they'd puzzle over ours. The thought is strangely comforting and eerie at the same time. It puts us in the same continuum as those who came before, all trying to leave a mark on a planet that quietly erases everything in its own time. Sometimes, when scientists talk about these possibilities, they use the term the Silurian hypothesis. It's a thought experiment proposed by astrophysicists Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt, who asked, if an industrial civilization existed millions of years ago, say during the age of dinosaurs, would we even be able to detect it today? Most likely not. Geological processes recycle the crust. In a few million years, erosion, tectonics, and chemical weathering erase almost every trace. What might remain are subtle chemical signatures, anomalies in sediment layers, isotopic ratios, maybe a spike in atmospheric carbon similar to our current one. So, even if something intelligent and organized had existed before, it would take more than archaeology to find it. We'd need to read the rocks themselves as historical records. This idea might sound far-fetched, but it highlights something profound. Civilizations, no matter how advanced, are temporary compared to the planet. We're used to thinking of ancient ruins as ancient, but even the oldest pyramids are a blink in geological time. A few thousand years. The Earth measures in millions. And yet, even within those vast scales, it's possible for hints to survive. Fragments of tool marks, unexplained alignments, sudden shifts in the fossil record, or mythic echoes that refuse to fade. Take, for instance, the global flood myths found on nearly every continent. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, the biblical story of Noah, the Hindu tale of Manu, the Greek legend of Deucalion, the Native American stories of world renewal, all speak of a great deluge that wiped away a world before ours. Some scholars interpret this as cultural memory of real floods that marked the end of the Ice Age. Massive meltwater pulses reshaped coastlines and drowned entire regions. Imagine watching the ocean rise week after week, devouring fertile plains, villages, and everything familiar. It would have felt like the end of the world. Generations later, that memory could easily transform into legend, a cautionary tale, a remembrance of a lost age. What fascinates scientists today is how consistently those stories line up with geological events. It's as if humanity has been trying to remind itself of something it once knew, that the world can change suddenly, that whole civilizations can vanish, and that the clues to their existence might still lie somewhere just out of reach. Modern technology is helping us look again. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, and oceanic lidar scanning are revealing buried structures we never knew existed. In the Amazon, researchers are finding traces of ancient road systems and geometric earthworks hidden under centuries of forest. In the Sahara, buried rivers and settlements suggest a time when the desert was green and populated. Each discovery reshapes our picture of what early humans were capable of. The more we find, the more we realize how incomplete our understanding is. The soil beneath us is not just dirt, it's a library. Every layer holds a page from a different chapter of the planet's story. To read it, we have to learn patience, the kind of patience the earth itself practices. Stone doesn't hurry, sediment doesn't argue, it just waits. And within that stillness might be the record of worlds we've forgotten. So tonight, as we begin this long exploration into the possibility of a civilization before civilization, let's keep one idea close. The evidence might not look like what we expect. It might not be temples or tools. It might be patterns in magnetic fields, anomalies in isotopic ratios, or ancient myths that line up too precisely to be coincidence. The clues could be everywhere, but they require a certain kind of seeing, not hurried, not certain, but quietly attentive, like listening for a whisper through layers of time. Because the earth doesn't tell its stories loudly, it speaks through hints and echoes, through the shapes of mountains, the tilt of old stones, the way cultures half a world apart built monuments to the same stars. Maybe that's not coincidence, maybe that's memory, the planet's way of keeping its past alive through us. And as we go deeper into this mystery, we'll follow those whispers, through stones, seas, myths, and science, to ask the simplest, most difficult question of all. If there really was a first civilization, where did it go, and what did it leave behind for us to find? For most of human history, we've believed that civilization began when we started writing things down. The first marks pressed into clay in Mesopotamia, the carved hieroglyphs along the Nile, the symbols etched into Indus seals. Those were the signs we thought of when we became truly human, organized, creative, technological. But as we look closer at the deep past, the picture begins to blur. It's becoming harder to tell where prehistory ends and history begins. Somewhere in that blurred line might be the faint outline of the vanished architects, the people who built and thought and dreamed long before the timeline we've drawn for ourselves. When we talk about these ancient builders, we're not necessarily talking about aliens or myths made real. We're talking about humans or beings very much like us, who lived during the last ice age or even earlier. The problem is, ice and time are excellent at erasing things. Imagine a city built 12,000 years ago, long before the pyramids, long before Sumer. After a few centuries, its roofs would collapse, its walls crumble. A few thousand years later, rivers and roots would reclaim it. After 10,000 years, glaciers would grind it down to dust, or rising seas would bury it under sediment. All that would remain are stones where stones shouldn't be. Patterns too deliberate to dismiss as chance. That's the kind of evidence we're left with. Not blueprints or artifacts, but puzzles carved into the landscape itself. There are places on Earth that stir that old question more strongly than others. The Great Sphinx of Giza, for instance, has been studied for centuries, yet still resists simple explanation. Some geologists have argued that the erosion marks along its body suggest water, not wind, as if it had once stood through long periods of heavy rain, which Egypt hasn't seen since the end of the last ice age. If that's true, it could mean the Sphinx is far older than the civilization that officially built it. Mainstream Egyptology remains cautious, but even the possibility opens the door to uncomfortable thoughts. If one of our most famous monuments might be older than we thought, how many others might be hiding similar secrets? Travel thousands of kilometers east to the plains of Anatolia, and you find Göbekli Tepe, that quiet archaeological revolution. There, in soft hills once thought empty, massive stone pillars rise from the soil, arranged in circular enclosures like an ancient observatory. Each pillar is carved with images of animals, abstract symbols, and precise geometry. Radiocarbon dating places it around 11,500 years old, long before agriculture or cities were supposed to exist. Whoever built it wasn't following any rulebook we recognize. They organized labor, transported multi-ton stones, and created art that implies deep symbolic thinking. What makes it even stranger is that the site was deliberately buried after centuries of use, as if its builders wanted to hide it. They covered their own masterpiece and left no clear trace of why. Göbekli Tepe doesn't stand alone anymore. Similar, though smaller, sites are being found across the region. Each time, the timeline of complexity edges backward, and the line between myth and archaeology grows thinner. Some researchers now suspect that the end of the Ice Age wasn't the dawn of civilization, but its second morning, a rebuilding, not a beginning. When we look at ruins around the world, the patterns begin to repeat. The pyramids of Egypt, the step temples of Mesoamerica, the megaliths of South America, the stone circles scattered through Europe, the giant statues of Easter Island, all separated by oceans and millennia, yet sharing striking architectural similarities. Triangular structures, astronomical alignments, precise cardinal orientations. It might be coincidence, a shared human instinct for symmetry in the sky. But it might also suggest that knowledge travels farther and lasts longer than we think. Take the precision of ancient construction. In Peru, at sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, vast polygonal stones fit together so tightly that not even a knife blade can slip between them. The surfaces are irregular, each stone unique, yet they interlock perfectly without mortar. The engineering required to shape and move those blocks is still debated. Some believe it was done with simple tools and patience. Others argue that the techniques were more advanced than we assume. Whatever the truth, it speaks to a level of mastery that didn't appear suddenly. It suggests a long tradition of skill, passed down and refined, perhaps inherited from builders whose names and stories are long forgotten. It's easy to forget that history, as we know it, is fragile. Libraries burn, languages die, oral traditions fade. If a culture doesn't record itself in durable form, it can vanish completely within a few generations. That's why the idea of a vanished civilization isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. We've seen entire empires rise and disappear in recorded history alone. The Indus Valley Civilization, once home to tens of thousands of people, left behind perfectly planned cities and complex drainage systems, but not a single readable text. We still don't know what they called themselves. If something like that could vanish within a few thousand years, what about something older, erased by ice and ocean rather than war and time? Archaeologists working along continental shelves have begun to find tantalizing clues. Off the coast of India, near the Gulf of Khumbat, sonar scans revealed structures that look like ancient cities now buried under layers of sediment. Divers recovered artifacts later dated to around 9,000 years ago, older than any known urban site on land. There's debate, as always, about whether these formations are natural or man-made. But if they are human-built, they rewrite the story of when we first began living together in complex societies. Similar finds have appeared near Japan, the Bahamas, and the Mediterranean. Each one challenges the neat boundaries of history we've drawn around ourselves. What makes these discoveries even more compelling is how they align with mythology. Nearly every ancient culture has a story of a world before this one. A lost age destroyed by fire, flood, or catastrophe. The Greeks called it Atlantis. The Hindus described it as the Satya Yuga, the Golden Age. The Maya spoke of previous creations wiped out by floods or earthquakes. Aboriginal Australian stories recall great floods that match the timing of post-glacial sea rises. It's tempting to see these as independent myths, but they may be collective memories of real events. Memories of when coastlines shifted, when the sea swallowed the old world and forced survivors to start again inland. If those survivors carried fragments of their culture, perhaps they seeded what would become the known ancient civilizations of later millennia. The traces we find today might be echoes of that migration. Knowledge scattered like seeds, adapted and reshaped by each new generation. That could explain why pyramid-like structures, astronomical calendars, and similar mythic symbols appear all over the globe, even among peoples who never met. They might all be descendants of the same ancestral blueprint, diluted and rewritten through time. Yet even as we piece these patterns together, we have to balance wonder with evidence. Science demands restraint. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. For now, we don't have definitive artifacts of an unknown civilization older than the ones we already know. But that doesn't mean it didn't exist. It means the record is still incomplete, waiting. As technology improves, as we scan deeper under forests and oceans, new pages of the story may surface. What matters is the openness to possibility, the willingness to listen when the earth whispers something that doesn't fit our expectations. One of the more curious puzzles lies in ancient maps. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, shows parts of the Antarctic coast long before its official discovery and apparently without ice. Historians still debate its accuracy and origin. Some argue it was based on older charts copied and recopied over centuries, perhaps tracing back to an age when different coastlines existed. If true, that would mean knowledge survived through forgotten channels, slipping quietly across ages and cultures until it resurfaced in the hands of later cartographers. Knowledge has a way of surviving in fragments. Symbols repeat, geometry echoes. Stories endure long after languages die. The builders who carved massive stones, who aligned temples to solstices, who watched the stars and built myths around them, they may not have thought of themselves as the first or the only. To them, perhaps, civilization was already ancient. They could have been remembering someone before them, just as we remember them now. That's what makes this idea so fascinating. It isn't about proving a hidden empire or rewriting every history book. It's about understanding that our story might be deeper than we realize. Civilization could be more like a tide than a line, rising, receding, rising again. Each time it leaves behind faint marks, half-erased footprints on the shore, and somewhere beneath the next layer of sand there may still be traces of those who built before us. In the quiet of an excavation site, archaeologists sometimes speak of feeling a presence, not in a mystical way, but in the sense that the work connects them across time. A pottery shard in the hand is a handshake with someone who lived thousands of years ago. Now imagine that handshake stretching even farther, across 10,000, 20,000 years. What would we find in their grip? Would it feel familiar, the same curiosity, the same desire to build, to record, to understand? Or would it feel alien, as if we were meeting not our ancestors but our predecessors? Maybe the reason we haven't recognized their traces is that we're looking for ourselves in the past, for cities, machines, writing, metal. But what if their civilization looked different? What if their legacy wasn't built in steel and stone, but in knowledge, in geometry, in subtle manipulation of natural materials? A civilization could be advanced in ways that don't mirror ours. They might have understood nature deeply rather than reshaping it. If they learned to live with the planet rather than against it, they could leave very little trace, and that could be why we struggle to find them. In the end, it comes down to humility. We like to think we're the pinnacle, that everything led to us. But maybe we're just one more version of a repeating pattern, the latest in a line of builders reaching toward understanding, each thinking they were the first. Somewhere in the ruins, under layers of soil and time, their fingerprints might still be there, pressed into stone or written into the stars. As we continue this quiet search, it helps to remember that history isn't a closed book. It's an ongoing conversation between the living and the dead, between evidence and imagination. The vanished architects may not be gone at all. Their work might still shape the world we know. In the alignments of old temples, the myths we tell, and the restless urge that drives us to explore, to dig, to remember. If the earth does keep its memories, then perhaps every mountain, every shoreline, every buried ruin is part of a message written in slow motion. A message we're only just beginning to read. And somewhere between the stones and the silence, between myth and measurement, we might still hear the faint echo of those ancient builders calling across the ages, saying simply, "We were here." It's strange to think that stone can speak. It doesn't use words, it doesn't move, it doesn't shout for attention. Yet somehow, when you stand before an ancient monument, a wall, or even a single weathered carving, there's a quiet feeling that it's trying to tell you something. Not in sentences, but in patterns. The placement of blocks, the direction they face, the effort it must have taken to build them. All of it adds up to a kind of message, one that doesn't fade easily with time. Stone endures longer than memory, and that endurance turns it into a storyteller. Every culture that has ever built in stone has done so, consciously or not, to speak across generations, to whisper, "We were here and this mattered." When we look around the world, that whisper becomes a chorus. Pyramids in Egypt, step pyramids in Mexico, megalithic terraces in Peru, stone circles in Britain, dolmens in Korea, and temple complexes in Cambodia. Oceans and eras separate them, yet they echo each other. Each structure rises toward the sky, aligns with stars, marks solstices or equinoxes, and follows geometry that seems too precise for coincidence. The repetition of these themes makes you wonder, did humans in different corners of the earth arrive at the same ideas independently, or were they remembering something older, something inherited? It's easy to forget that myth and monument often belong to the same story. In nearly every ancient culture, tales of gods and heroes are tied to places built of stone. In Mesoamerica, legends tell of the gods descending where the pyramids now stand. In Egypt, temples were said to be replicas of heavenly structures, built according to divine blueprints. In the Pacific, the Moai of Easter Island were believed to house ancestral spirits, watching over the people. Even in prehistoric Europe, where written language hadn't yet arrived, stone circles seem to have marked both ritual and cosmic order, sacred calendars set in rock. Each culture encoded its understanding of the world, not just in words, but in architecture. The stones became pages in a book that the weather couldn't erase. The more we learn about these ancient structures, the more complex they become. Many are aligned with extraordinary precision to astronomical events. The Great Pyramid's sides face almost perfectly north, south, east and west, an alignment that would be difficult even with modern instruments. At Stonehenge, the rising sun at the summer solstice shines directly into the heart of the circle, while at Machu Picchu, the Intihuatana stone marks the equinox with almost uncanny accuracy. Across the world, ancient builders tracked the sun, the moon and the stars, embedding their cycles into stone. It's as if they wanted the heavens themselves to read their work. That raises a question. Why were they so obsessed with the sky? For early societies, the heavens were both calendar and compass. The movements of celestial bodies told them when to plant, when to harvest, when to travel. But maybe there was more to it. Maybe the builders saw the sky not as distant, but as a mirror. To align a temple with the stars was to participate in the order of the cosmos, to link heaven and earth through architecture. And if those patterns of alignment appear everywhere, it could mean that the same cosmic blueprint was remembered and repeated long after the original builders were gone. Some researchers suggest that myth itself might be a kind of code, a way to preserve astronomical or geological knowledge through storytelling. The story of a god chasing the sun could be a memory of seasonal change. A flood myth could record the end of an ice age. The destruction of a golden city might describe the fall of a real place swallowed by rising seas. When you hear these stories side by side across continents, their similarities start to sound less like coincidence, and more like a shared memory of real events told in the language of symbol and emotion. For instance, the constellation Orion appears in myths from Egypt, Greece, Africa, Australia, and the Americas. In Egypt, it was associated with Osiris, the god of rebirth and the afterlife. In the Americas, it was sometimes seen as a hunter or a cosmic ancestor. The arrangement of the three stars in Orion's belt mirrors the layout of the three Great Pyramids at Giza, and similar triadic alignments appear in other ancient sites as well. Whether by design or by intuition, humanity seems to have been mapping the sky onto the earth for thousands of years. The same pattern repeated in different lands could mean that a single idea, that the heavens and the ground were connected, was passed down from an earlier source, older than any known culture. Stone remembers better than we do. It keeps its shape long after its purpose is forgotten. That's why archaeologists often find themselves decoding, not reading. A temple built for the sun may later be used for worshipping another god entirely. A site once sacred to one culture might be inherited by another, its meaning changed but its structure preserved. Over time, layers of human belief accumulate like sediment. What begins as memory becomes myth, and what begins as myth becomes mystery. When we look at a ruin today, we're not just seeing what it was, but everything it has been since then. One of the most intriguing aspects of this global pattern is how ancient architecture and mythology often refer to cycles. The rise and fall of worlds, the ages of humanity, the endless turning of time. In Hindu cosmology, history unfolds in repeating yugas, golden, silver, bronze, and dark ages. In Greek myth, humanity passes through similar stages, each one declining from the last. The Maya counted great cycles called backtons, each marking a new creation. These systems may have arisen independently, but they share a common logic, that civilization isn't permanent, that the world renews itself in waves. If a truly ancient civilization once existed, it might have been remembered through these cycles not as history, but as mythic recurrence. Even today, we can see how knowledge turns into legend when written records are lost. Imagine what happens over thousands of years. A city destroyed by flood becomes a story about gods punishing humankind. A powerful ruler becomes a demigod. A natural disaster becomes a moral parable. Over enough generations, the literal fades and the symbolic takes over, but the seed of memory remains. When we listen to ancient myths about gods teaching humans to farm, to build, to measure the heavens, maybe we're hearing distorted echoes of real teachers, survivors of a vanished age passing their skills to people just starting over. There's another clue hidden in language itself. Words for stone, sky, God, and light often share common roots across distant cultures. Some linguists think this might hint at deep connections between ancient peoples, perhaps from migrations that spread both genes and stories long before the earliest written languages. If those words carried not just meaning but myth, if they named the same stars, the same fears, the same reverence for builders long gone, then our oldest stories could be the residue of a global memory, faint but persistent. When archaeologists map these patterns, they often find something else surprising: geometry, circles, triangles, spirals, golden ratios. Ancient builders seem to understand harmony in numbers. In Egypt, the ratio between the pyramid's height and base closely approximates pi. In South America, terraces follow Fibonacci-like sequences that mirror natural growth patterns. Even prehistoric carvings, spirals, grids, interlocking shapes, repeat mathematical motifs found in art from entirely different continents. Whether by coincidence or continuity, it seems that humans have always been drawn to the same patterns that shape the natural world. Perhaps they weren't inventing geometry at all. Perhaps they were remembering it. But of course, not all mysteries demand lost civilizations. Human creativity is vast, and similar solutions can arise independently. Still, the sense of connection remains hard to ignore. There's something deeply human about stacking stones toward the sky and calling it sacred. The act itself might be instinctive, the same impulse that makes us map constellations in the night or tell stories about where we came from. Maybe the echo we hear isn't of another species or an ancient empire, but of our own enduring pattern, to build meaning from stone and story alike. In some ways, myth and architecture are the same art form. Both are attempts to hold onto something fleeting. A myth holds onto ideas. A monument holds onto form. When they work together, they create memory that outlasts both individuals and cultures. That's why the most enduring ruins are those woven into story. The pyramids are not just stone. They're symbols of ascension and eternity. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia are stairways between heaven and earth. The temples of Angkor aren't just buildings. They're cosmic maps carved into the jungle. Wherever you look, stone and story reinforce each other, each keeping the other alive. Some researchers have noticed that ancient myths often describe the construction of great works by beings not entirely human. Giants, gods, star people, or teachers who came from the sea. These figures could represent memory personified. In a sense, when a culture forgets who built something, it fills the gap with mythic figures. The architects become divine because their origins are lost. Over time, the stories separate from the evidence, and the ruins become legends rather than records. To us, that might look like superstition, but it's also a kind of preservation. The myth keeps the monument meaningful, even when the facts are gone. Imagine a civilization thousands of years from now, discovering the ruins of our own cities. The inscriptions will have faded, the languages forgotten. Maybe they'll find the remains of skyscrapers and assume they were temples. Maybe our satellites will be interpreted as relics of gods. They'll invent stories to explain what they can't prove the same way we do. Myths are not lies. They're memory translated into metaphor. And the fact that we still tell stories about lost worlds, vanished architects and ancient teachers might mean those memories still live in us, whether or not we can name their source. If we follow those echoes far enough, they lead us to another question. Not just what was built, but why. Building in stone is difficult. It takes generations of effort, enormous resources, and a vision that extends beyond a single lifetime. So why did so many ancient people do it? Why not simpler materials, easier methods? Maybe because they weren't only building for themselves, they were building for the future, to pass on something they couldn't express in words. A monument is a form of time travel. It's a message in the only language that doesn't need translation. Endurance. That endurance is what connects us to them. When you walk among ruins, you're walking through layers of thought made solid. Every block, every carving, every alignment is part of a sentence in a language we're still learning to read. The earth has carried these stories for thousands of years, and even now they haven't gone silent. They're still telling us that humanity has always been curious, always reaching upward, always remembering. Somewhere in those echoes, between the carved myths and the unspoken mathematics, between the ruins and the rituals, there might be faint traces of the first builders. Not proof, not certainty, but presence. They could be the reason we keep building, keep telling, keep searching. Because deep down, maybe we're not just learning who we are, we're trying to remember who we were. And as we move forward, following the stones and the stories they carry, the trail begins to curve towards something even quieter. The memory of the earth itself. The possibility that the planet has been recording everything patiently in the strata beneath our feet. If stone can speak, perhaps the soil can remember. And if that's true, then the next step in our search isn't to look upward at the stars or outward at the ruins, but inward into the ground itself, where the earth keeps its oldest secrets still waiting to be heard. If you could drain the oceans for a single hour and look upon the world beneath, the map of human history would change forever. Beneath those dark waters lie vast plains, river valleys and mountain ranges that were once dry land. Places where tens of thousands of years ago people might have walked, hunted, built, and lived before the sea quietly swallowed their world. It's almost impossible to imagine today, but the Earth's coastline is not a fixed line. It has shifted constantly with the rhythm of ice and warmth, advancing and retreating like a slow breath through time. And somewhere in that ebb and flow, entire chapters of our story may have been lost. Most of our known ancient civilizations grew up along coasts and rivers. Egypt followed the Nile, Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates. The Indus Valley hugged its river basin, and early China thrived along the Yellow River. Water gave life, food, and transport. It also gave memory, myths of floods, sea gods, and lost lands. So when sea levels rose after the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, the ocean claimed more land. It took stories, settlements, and possibly the earliest foundations of what we'd now call civilization. At the peak of the last glacial period, the world was colder and drier. Enormous ice sheets covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia, locking away so much water that sea levels were roughly 120 meters lower than they are today. That means the continents stretched farther outward. Britain was connected to mainland Europe by a region now called Doggerland. Indonesia, Malaysia, and Australia formed a single landmass known as Sunda. The area between Siberia and Alaska, now the Bering Strait, was a wide, frozen bridge. Coastlines extended for hundreds of kilometers beyond where the waves reach now, forming fertile valleys and gentle plains where early humans could thrive. When the ice began to melt, the seas rose slowly at first, then in dramatic pulses. Entire regions disappeared within a few generations. Imagine living on a coastal plain, watching the tide creep higher year after year, realizing that the horizon is coming closer. To the people of that time, it would have felt like the end of the world. For many, it probably was. Those who fled inland carried with them not just memories, but stories. Stories of floods, of sinking lands, of a world swallowed by water. Thousands of years later, those stories would become myths. Today, archaeologists and oceanographers are beginning to explore those drowned landscapes. The challenge is immense. The ocean is vast. Its depths cold and dark, its currents powerful. Yet as technology improves, with sonar mapping, underwater drones, and satellite data, the contours of ancient worlds are slowly reappearing. One of the most discussed sites lies off the coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni. There, about 25 meters below the surface, lies a massive stone formation that looks almost architectural. Terraces, steps, and platforms arranged in geometric precision. Some surfaces are flat and sharply edged, while others resemble carved stairways. The structure rises like a sunken ziggurat from the seabed. Some geologists argue it is a natural formation, shaped by currents and tectonic forces. Others believe it shows signs of deliberate modification, that human hands once shaped it before rising seas claimed it. No consensus exists, but the site continues to draw divers, scientists, and dreamers alike. Even if nature built it, it is a reminder of how easily the boundary between natural and human-made can blur underwater. Farther west, off the coast of India, sonar scans in the Gulf of Kambat have revealed submerged patterns that resemble urban layouts. Grid-like formations stretching for several kilometers. Artifacts recovered from the area have been dated to around 9,000 years ago, though the context remains debated. If confirmed as man-made, that would make them older than any known city on land. The idea that an organized settlement once thrived there before being engulfed by post-glacial flooding isn't implausible. The Indus Valley civilization, which emerged millennia later, may have inherited stories or remnants from such coastal ancestors. In the Mediterranean, near the coast of Malta, lie the remains of stone walls and terraces beneath clear blue water. Some appear connected to ancient harbor structures on land, suggesting that what is now seabed was once shoreline. Around the world, similar findings emerge: submerged ruins near Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, the Bahamas, even off the coasts of Scotland and Denmark. Each discovery is small, fragmentary, and contested, but together they sketch a larger possibility: that much of humanity's early development happened near the sea, and that rising oceans erased those beginnings almost completely. When we study the ocean floor, we find more than just ruins. We find riverbeds winding across what is now open sea, ancient deltas frozen in sediment, and the imprints of shorelines long vanished. Off the eastern coast of the United States, sonar mapping has revealed vast river systems beneath the Atlantic shelf, showing where land once stretched hundreds of kilometers beyond the coast. In the North Sea, scientists have reconstructed Doggerland, a low-lying region that once connected Britain to Europe. It was home to forests, lakes, and grasslands, teeming with animals and humans alike. Around 8,000 years ago, a massive flood, possibly triggered by a collapse of glacial ice in North America, sent waves surging across the North Atlantic. Within days, much of Doggerland was gone. Today, fishermen still dredge up ancient tools, bones, and artifacts from those waters. Each discovery challenges the simplicity of our timelines. For a long time, we assumed that civilization began only after the Ice Age ended, when the climate stabilized and agriculture spread. But what if the process started earlier, and the ocean simply erased the evidence? If early communities developed along the coastlines of that older world, then the proof of their existence lies underwater, inaccessible for most of human history, only now coming into view. The ocean hides more than physical structures. It hides chemical records, sediment layers, and isotopic clues that tell us what the planet was like when those lands were dry. Deep sea cores show sudden shifts in temperature, salt levels, and carbon concentrations, signatures of rapid change. Some scientists link these to the catastrophic flooding events that punctuated the end of the Ice Age, known as meltwater pulses. Each pulse could have raised sea levels by several meters in just a few centuries, enough to submerge entire coastal civilizations. It's worth remembering how little of the seafloor we've actually mapped. Roughly 80% of it remains unexplored in detail. In many regions, the ocean is still a blank on the map, a vast, dark archive waiting to be read. As scanning technology advances, we're beginning to fill in that archive. The patterns emerging are both familiar and unsettling. Straight lines, terraces, circular depressions, and symmetrical ridges appear in places where nature alone struggles to explain them. Sometimes they turn out to be geological, sometimes they resist easy categorization. Even if every one of those underwater formations proves natural, they still tell an important story: that the Earth is far older and more changeable than our written history can capture. But if even one of them turns out to be a true remnant of human hands, the implications are enormous. It would mean that civilization, not just scattered tribes or early farmers, but organized societies with architecture, art, and astronomy, existed long before our accepted record begins. There's another layer to this puzzle, one that doesn't involve buildings at all. Beneath the seafloor, trapped in layers of silt and sand, are chemical traces of ancient life. Scientists studying these sediments have found microscopic evidence of sudden shifts in vegetation and climate around the time sea levels rose. Some researchers even speculate that pollutants or unusual carbon spikes might one day serve as fingerprints of earlier industrial activity, should any have existed before us. That's the idea behind the Silurian hypothesis, that if a technological civilization had arisen millions of years ago, its only surviving evidence would be subtle chemical anomalies in the rocks. So far we haven't found anything conclusive, but the search itself teaches us humility. The deeper we dig, the more we realize how easily the earth can forget. Still, the sea has a way of preserving what land erases. Shipwrecks survive for centuries in its cold embrace. Entire harbors have been found frozen in silt, their wooden piers intact. Pottery and stone tools endure far longer underwater than in open air. In places like Pavlopetri, off the coast of Greece, we found submerged streets, buildings, and courtyards dating back 5,000 years. It's one of the oldest known underwater cities, proof that human settlements can vanish beneath the waves yet remain astonishingly well preserved. If such sites exist from known history, it's reasonable to think others might lie deeper still from forgotten ages. Myths remember what history forgets. Cultures around the world speak of lands lost to the sea. Atlantis, Lyoness, High Brazil, Kumari Kandam, Lemuria. The names differ, but the pattern is the same. A great civilization, prosperous and wise, destroyed by flood. Modern science explains these as symbolic tales of real geological events, yet the persistence of the theme is striking. People across continents remembered water taking everything. They remembered islands sinking, coastlines vanishing, the world shrinking as the ocean grew. Perhaps the myths survived because they describe something everyone once experienced, a trauma so vast it became universal. Some of the haunting evidence isn't physical at all, but linguistic. The word for sea or ocean in many ancient languages traces back to roots meaning great mother or devourer. The sea gave life, but it also took it away. It was both cradle and grave, creator and destroyer. For early humans, the sea's power must have felt divine, its reach infinite. When it advanced inland, swallowing the they knew, it must have seemed as though the gods themselves were moving the horizon. Generations later, that fear would turn into story and the story into myth. What makes the puzzle beneath the waves so captivating is that it connects two vast mysteries: human history and planetary change. We're learning that civilization doesn't stand apart from the Earth's rhythms. It rises and falls with them. If entire landscapes can vanish beneath the sea in a geological instant, then it's no wonder our record of the past is incomplete. The ocean is both archive and eraser, keeping what it chooses and hiding the rest. Even now, researchers mapping the continental shelves talk about how strange it feels to see the ghost of an ancient river valley or the outline of a submerged mountain that was once an island. It's as though the planet still remembers its earlier self. Each new discovery brings us a little closer to understanding not just where we came from, but how fragile our presence really is. Cities, borders, maps, they all depend on the illusion of permanence, but the ocean reminds us that nothing stays fixed for long. If a first civilization did exist, the sea would be its tomb and its guardian. Its ruins would be buried under meters of sediment, its artifacts scattered, its metals corroded, its memory reduced to rumor. We might never find it in full, only hints, an elastimate of stones, an unnatural terrace, a myth that matches a geological event. And maybe that's enough, because even fragments can change how we see ourselves. The ocean has always been both the beginning and the end of stories. Life emerged from it, trade and travel began upon it. And one day, if the tides rise again as they once did, it may reclaim much of what we've built. That thought isn't meant to be grim. It's a reminder of scale. We are part of a cycle older than any civilization, older than any myth. When the waves move, they are rewriting the world in the same slow rhythm they always have. And perhaps, somewhere beneath those waves, the remnants of an earlier chapter still rest, silent, intact, waiting for us to learn how to listen through water. If the earth does keep its memories, then the ocean is where it keeps its secrets. We've only begun to read the first few pages as we keep exploring, following the sunken coastlines and tracing the outlines of forgotten worlds. The next question quietly rises from the depths. If patterns keep repeating across time and across the planet, maybe the clues left behind by that first civilization are not random at all. Maybe they form a design, a language written into the geometry of Earth itself. And that is where the next step of this slow journey leads, into the patterns that shouldn't exist, yet do, as if the planet itself remembers the hands that shaped them long before us. Everywhere you look on this planet, patterns appear where they shouldn't, circles, lines, alignments, and ratios, scattered across continents, carved into stone, traced into soil, drawn with a precision that seems out of place for their supposed age. When scientists map these features, they often find themselves pausing, wondering whether coincidence can really stretch so far. How do so many of the world's oldest monuments line up with the stars, the solstices, and sometimes even with each other, separated by oceans and tens of thousands of years? Maybe it's human nature to find order in chaos, or maybe, buried within those alignments, there's something more deliberate, the remnants of knowledge that predates our written memory. Patterns are the language of intelligence. We see them in everything we build and in everything we study, from the geometry of a city to the orbit of a planet. Patterns are what make the universe understandable, but sometimes the patterns we find in ancient works seem to suggest a grasp of mathematics, astronomy, and geography that shouldn't have been possible for cultures labeled as primitive. It's one thing to say people noticed the sun rising in the same spot each solstice. It's another to realize they built massive structures that encode those positions with engineering accuracy. When enough of these alignments appear, the question becomes not whether they noticed the pattern, but where they learned it. Take the pyramids of Egypt. Their base aligns almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, with an error margin of less than a fraction of a degree. To achieve that, the builders would have needed to measure the Earth's rotation with astonishing precision, using tools far simpler than our instruments today. The same geometric care appears in other ancient sites. The pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico share a similar layout, aligned with celestial events and following proportions that match those of Giza with eerie closeness. The Great Pyramid there, the Pyramid of the Sun, sits at a latitude that mirrors Giza's in mathematical relationship to the equator. The chance that two cultures, separated by an ocean and thousands of years, would arrive at nearly identical measurements by accident feels small. Even the scale of these monuments fits a curious pattern. The ratio between the height of the Great Pyramid and the circumference of its base mirrors the ratio of the Earth's radius to its circumference, an approximation of pi encoded in stone. We can say that's coincidence, and maybe it is. But it's a coincidence that appears again and again in different forms. The golden ratio in Greek temples, harmonic spacing in megalithic circles, consistent angular relationships in South American terraces. Ancient builders may not have used the same equations we do, but they seem to know the same relationships. Across the world, from the jungles of Cambodia to the Andes of Peru, ancient architecture displays alignments not only to the sun, but to stars that have shifted out of view since those structures were built. Precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, changes the apparent position of stars over millennia. To align a monument perfectly to a star's position means the builders understood this motion, or at least observed the sky long enough to notice it. In Egypt, the shafts of the Great Pyramid once pointed toward Orion's belt, and the pole star of that era, not the one we see today. At Angkor Wat, the temple layout mirrors the constellation Draco. In Mexico, the temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza casts a serpent-like shadow at the equinox, perfectly matching the ancient myth of the feathered serpent descending from the heavens. These alignments suggest a worldview in which earth and sky were not separate. They were parts of one great machine, and architecture was the bridge between them. Some patterns are geographical rather than celestial. When researchers draw lines connecting ancient sites, pyramids, temples, and megalithic structures, they sometimes find that many of them fall along great circles, the shortest possible paths around the globe. This so-called Great Circle alignment includes Giza, Easter Island, Machu Picchu, Mohenjo-Daro, and Angkor. Could be coincidence. With enough points, any pattern can emerge. But it could also hint at an understanding of global geometry far older than we think humans possessed. How could ancient builders know the curvature of the earth without modern tools? Perhaps by observing the heavens carefully enough, or perhaps by inheriting knowledge passed down from an earlier culture that had already mapped the world in some way. Patterns also appear in the dimensions of these sites. When you compare measurements across continents, certain numbers recur: 72, 108, 216, 432. These numbers show up in ancient myth, music, and mathematics. In Hindu cosmology, for example, the Great Cosmic Cycle is said to last 4,320,000 years. The Earth precessional cycle, the time it takes for the axis to complete one wobble, is about 25,920 years, which divides neatly by those same factors. The same numbers appear in Norse myth, in the Sumerian king lists, even in the spacing of stones at some megalithic sites. These repeating ratios could be coincidence, or they could reflect an ancient recognition of natural cycles, of celestial rhythms that govern both time and structure. The mystery deepens when we consider the precision of ancient stonework. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, enormous blocks of andesite fit together with microscopic accuracy, cut into interlocking shapes that resemble machine work. Each weighs dozens of tons, yet they align perfectly along straight edges and right angles. The builders had no iron tools, no steel saws, no cranes. The official explanation credits simple techniques and immense labor, but even with that, the consistency is astonishing. Nearby, at Sacsayhuaman, megalithic walls use jigsaw-shaped stones that fit like pieces of a puzzle, each one carved to mesh exactly with its neighbors. The surfaces are smooth and polished, the joints so tight that even a razor blade can pass between them. It's easy to underestimate the level of craftsmanship required to achieve that without modern technology. Skeptics rightly point out that human ingenuity can achieve wonders with time and determination, and that we shouldn't underestimate our ancestors. But it's also fair to ask how so many cultures, isolated by distance and time, developed similar techniques, similar alignments, and similar myths about the purpose of their monuments. It's as though everyone was trying to remember the same set of instructions, half forgotten but intuitively familiar. Some see these patterns as evidence of shared origin, the idea that long before recorded history, a culture or network of cultures spread knowledge globally. Others view them as the natural outcome of human curiosity, with different groups independently discovering the same truths about the world. Both explanations have their weight, but the possibility that a forgotten civilization once mapped the heavens, measured the earth, and encoded its findings in stone remains one of the most haunting questions in archaeology. If you strip away the speculation, one fact remains solid. These monuments hold data. They are repositories of astronomical and mathematical knowledge preserved through architecture. To build something that marks the solstice or the equinox requires long-term observation, decades, even centuries. That means these builders were not primitive. They were organized, patient, and capable of abstract thought. They measured time not in days but in generations. Patterns also appear in mythic structure, the way stories mirror each other across cultures. Floods, lost cities, sky gods descending, serpents guarding sacred knowledge, heroes reborn after destruction. These recurring motifs might not be coincidence either. Some anthropologists argue that they represent a shared symbolic language rooted in human psychology. Others suggest they might encode fragments of history, real events mythologized over time. If the same stories arise independently in distant cultures, it could mean the same experiences happened everywhere, or it could mean they were all drawing from an older source. The problem is that human history is short, but geological time is long. The planet resets itself regularly. Mountains rise and erode. Rivers shift. Deserts form. Forests disappear. If a civilization existed before the last ice age, its cities would now lie hundreds of meters below rock or sea. We'd see only faint residues, alignments, anomalies, patterns that don't fit the rest. In that sense, what we call unexplained architecture might be exactly what's left when everything else is gone. The design outlives the designer. One of the most interesting ways scientists approach these questions is by studying orientation patterns statistically. When researchers catalog hundreds of megalithic sites and analyze their directions, they find that many align precisely to solar or lunar events far more often than random chance would allow. That suggests intention, not accident. Even if no global network existed, there was at least a shared obsession with marking time through structure. These ancient observatories were calendars carved into the earth, ways of predicting the turning of seasons, the flooding of rivers, the arrival of harvest. But maybe they were also something deeper, a way of remembering, a physical link between human life and the cosmos, between the past and the eternal. When you stand inside such a monument, it's hard not to feel that connection. The air shifts differently, sounds echo in deliberate ways. Many of these structures were built with acoustic precision. Stone chambers at New Grange in Ireland amplify sound at certain frequencies. Temples in South America resonate when you clap or chant within them. These effects aren't random. They reflect an understanding of resonance. The same physical principles we use in architecture and acoustics today. Sound, like geometry, was another pattern ancient builders mastered long before recorded science. Sometimes the patterns go beyond architecture. Geologists and biologists have noticed that certain ancient sites sit atop areas of unusual electromagnetic activity or geological fault lines. Whether by coincidence or intuition, ancient builders often chose locations where Earth's natural energies concentrate. They might have noticed the subtle effects, static, heat, magnetism, and associated them with sacredness. Or perhaps they simply followed a pattern they didn't consciously understand but felt was right. Either way, the same kinds of sights appear around the globe, as if guided by the same quiet compass. Patterns are seductive. They draw us in because they promise meaning. But they also challenge us because once we see them, we can't easily unsee them. The risk is reading too much into coincidence. The reward is realizing that sometimes coincidence is just evidence we haven't yet explained. Science advances by questioning patterns, by testing whether they're real or imagined. And the patterns found in ancient architecture and myth continue to resist simple explanations. If there truly was a first civilization, one that mapped the stars, measured the planet, and taught its children through stone rather than script, its signature would look exactly like what we see today. Faint echoes in geometry, recurring ratios, impossible alignments, the shapes of memory disguised as design. We may never find a single artifact that proves its existence, but the patterns themselves might be its fingerprint. It's humbling to realize that even now, with satellites and supercomputers, we're still following the same instincts as our ancestors. Building, measuring, aligning, recording. We think in grids, map in degrees, orient our lives around the sun and the calendar. Civilization, it seems, always returns to patterns. Maybe that's the real legacy of whoever came first. The idea that knowledge once found can't truly be lost. It only changes form, waiting to be rediscovered. As we continue this quiet journey through Earth's hidden past, the patterns point us toward an even subtler record, one not written in architecture, but in the earth itself. The soil, the rocks, the ice, and the sediment hold a longer memory than any monument. If a first civilization existed, traces of it might still linger there, encoded in the chemistry of the planet. The next part of our search takes us deeper into that record, into the memory of the earth itself, where the story might still be written in layers of stone, waiting patiently beneath our feet. When we talk about memory, we usually think of something personal, the brain, the mind, a recollection that belongs to an individual. But the earth remembers too. It doesn't recall in images or words, but in layers, in textures, in chemistry. Every storm, every eruption, every life that has ever lived leaves a trace. Over billions of years, those traces have been pressed into rock, buried in mud, dissolved into oceans, frozen into ice. Together they form the planet's memory, an unbroken record of change written in a language of elements and time. If we learn how to read it, we might find that the earth has been recording everything, including us, including those who may have come before. When geologists cut into a cliff face or drill into the seabed, they're turning pages in that memory. Each layer of sediment marks a season, a year, a catastrophe. Dust from deserts, ash from volcanoes, pollen from forests long gone. All of it settles, compresses, and waits. In Greenland and Antarctica, ice cores stretch back hundreds of thousands of years. They trap bubbles of ancient air, tiny fossils of atmosphere. Scientists can read them like diaries, learning when the planet warmed, when it cooled, when fires burned, when oceans rose. And sometimes, hidden in those frozen layers, they find anomalies, spikes of carbon, traces of metals, signals that hint at something unusual happening on Earth. Usually those anomalies have natural explanations: a meteor impact, a volcanic eruption, a sudden burst of wildfires. But a few researchers have begun asking a question that feels almost heretical. What if one of those anomalies was caused by something not natural, something technological? That's the thought behind the so-called Silurian hypothesis. It's not proof of ancient civilizations, but a scientific exercise in humility. It asks, if an advanced society had existed millions of years ago, what would remain of it now? The answer is unsettling. Almost nothing. The Earth recycles itself constantly. The crust shifts, melts, reforms. In a few million years, even our deepest cities and tallest towers would be erased. All that might remain are subtle signals, chemical footprints in sediment, isotopic imbalances in carbon or oxygen, faint traces of synthetic materials. Those are the kinds of clues scientists now use to study our own industrial impact, our own brief civilization. When we burn fossil fuels, we change the ratio of carbon isotopes in the air. When we produce plastics, we leave polymer residues that settle into ocean floors. If our society vanished today, those layers would be our only legacy. A future geologist could look at them and see a thin band marking the Anthropocene, the era when humans briefly altered the planet's chemistry. And if it happened before, long before us, that earlier band might have already been buried under kilometers of rock. That idea brings the story closer to the planet itself. It reminds us that civilizations aren't separate from Earth. They're part of its processes. If one arose in deep prehistory, its traces wouldn't be artifacts or ruins, but patterns in the sediment, odd concentrations of rare metals, strange isotopic signatures, perhaps even microscopic remnants of synthetic compounds. The Earth's memory, if we could decode it fully, would tell us whether intelligence has visited this planet before in a form like ours. So far, we've only read the surface, but the surface alone holds mysteries enough. Across the continents, researchers find layers of ash, charcoal, and melted rock that speak of sudden upheavals, mass extinctions, comet impacts, abrupt climate shifts. The Younger Dryas period, around 1,800 years ago, is one of those puzzles. It marked a sudden return to glacial conditions just as the Ice Age was ending. The cause is debated, perhaps a comet impact, perhaps massive meltwater floods disrupting ocean currents. Either way, it coincides eerily with many flood myths around the world, stories of fire and ice, of destruction followed by rebirth. If an earlier civilization existed, that event might have been its undoing, a planetary reset that forced survivors to start again from scratch. The Earth holds other kinds of memory too, biological memory, written in genes. Every living species carries the imprint of its ancestors, tiny records of adaptation and survival. Our own DNA tells a story far older than written history. Genetic studies show that humans nearly went extinct around 70,000 years ago, perhaps reduced to a few thousand individuals after a massive volcanic eruption or climatic shift. That genetic bottleneck would have wiped out most of our diversity, including any traces of older parallel cultures. If advanced humans had existed before that event, their lineage might have ended there, erased not by conquest but by the simple mathematics of survival. What remained became us, a species with amnesia, starting over on the same old stage. Sometimes when geologists speak about the planet's past, they describe it like a heartbeat. Each age has a rhythm, slow warming, slow cooling, steady pulses of life and death. But occasionally the rhythm stutters, something extraordinary happens, an extinction, a flood, a sudden rise in carbon or radiation. These interruptions are the planet's way of marking turning points, as if each one were a chapter break in its autobiography. Some are natural, others perhaps not entirely so. Each could be a sign that something intelligent briefly flickered across the surface before being folded back into stone. What makes this idea so difficult to test is time itself. The further back you go, the less distinct the record becomes. Rock layers twist, compress, metamorphose, entire regions sink into the mantle and resurface millions of years later as mountains. Yet even within that destruction, the Earth preserves fragments, zircon crystals older than the moon's craters, grains of dust that once floated through ancient skies. In those fragments, scientists can detect signatures of atmospheric change. A slight enrichment of certain isotopes can reveal when plants began to photosynthesize, when oxygen first filled the air, when carbon levels spiked unexpectedly. Those spikes are the Earth's equivalent of emotional memory, moments so intense they left a scar. If a technological society had ever existed before, we might find its scars the same way. Not fossilized machines or ruins, but the aftermath of whatever energy it used. Perhaps a thin layer of synthetic elements, or a mysterious isotope that doesn't occur naturally. We look for those traces already, in part because we're creating them ourselves. Our pollution, our radiation, our industrial byproducts. They're all writing new lines into the geological record. 100,000 years from now, long after our buildings have vanished, that record will remain. And when future scientists, or whatever follows us, read it, they'll know someone was here. In a way, that's what makes Earth's memory both comforting and terrifying. It forgets almost everything, but not quite everything. It remembers enough to tell us that change is constant, that life survives, that intelligence, if it arises, is always temporary. Civilizations bloom like coral reefs, intricate, beautiful, fragile, and then dissolve back into the sea. The reef remains, reshaped, layered over, part of the next generation's foundation. The more we study the deep record, the more we realize that the Earth itself may be the continuity we've been searching for. It carries the memories of every species, every attempt at complexity, every spark of awareness. If there was a first civilization, the planet would remember it not as we do, with stories or monuments, but as a faint chemical rhythm repeating through time. Perhaps that rhythm is why we keep rediscovering the same ideas, the same patterns, the same drive to understand. We're echoing what came before, not consciously, but through the deep inheritance of a world that has already learned these lessons once. In places where tectonic plates collide, the Earth's memory becomes visible for a moment. Folded rock pushed upward, exposing layers once buried miles deep. Each band tells a story. Some are smooth and quiet, others sharp and chaotic. To a geologist, they're as meaningful as sentences. To most of us, they're just patterns. But maybe those patterns are the same language spoken by ancient builders and forgotten scientists, a language of cycles and proportions, of repetition and resonance. The planet has been composing in that language since long before us, and we've only just learned to listen. Even the deserts keep their records. Under the sand of the Sahara lie fossilized river systems, once green and alive, now frozen in satellite imagery. The desert wasn't always a desert. It shifted with the monsoons, turning fertile and dry in repeating waves. In one of those fertile periods, humans thrived. They painted the walls of caves with giraffes, elephants, and water scenes. And deeper still, under layers of dunes, archaeologists find tools and carvings far older than expected, artifacts that hint at cultures existing before the climate turned. The sand remembers the rivers, the rock remembers the builders. The story is still there, even if the surface is forgotten. Oceans too store their memories in silence. Sediments settle gently over centuries, forming soft layers that trap the smallest remains of life: shells, plankton, dust from distant continents. Scientists can analyze those layers, grain by grain, reconstructing temperature, oxygen, and even wind patterns from eons ago. Each microscopic fossil is a timestamp, a signature of an age. Somewhere in those layers there could be an unexplained anomaly. A spike of metals, a strange molecule, a chemical whisper of something we can't yet explain. Maybe we've already collected it, sitting unnoticed in some lab freezer, mislabeled as contamination. The planet's memory is vast, and we're still learning how to read its handwriting. What's striking is how forgiving the Earth is. No matter what happens, it rebuilds. Forests regrow, oceans circulate, species adapt. Even if a civilization burns itself out, the planet folds that event into its memory, heals, and moves on. To the Earth, a few thousand years is a heartbeat. That might be why it forgets so easily, why the evidence of earlier worlds is so faint. Time smooths everything down until only the shape of the story remains. But shapes can still be recognized, even when names and faces are gone. In a sense, the Earth's memory is what connects us to any who came before. It holds the continuity of the human impulse to build, to question, to survive. Every mine, every quarry, every fossil bed we open is a conversation with the past. We're reading its thoughts one layer at a time and leaving our own notes as we go. The dialogue never stops, it just changes speakers. And while the planet's memory is mostly impartial, it has moods. There are calm periods, long epochs of balance, and moments of violent correction. Extinctions, floods, quakes, fires. These are the planet's editing marks, reshaping its story when it grows too cluttered. Civilizations rise in the quiet spaces between those edits. They flourish when the Earth is calm and vanish when it turns the page. If that rhythm is repeated for millions of years, then the memory of the first civilization might simply be buried under too many revisions to see. But like faint handwriting beneath new ink, traces can still be detected with the right tools. We've begun developing those tools. Isotope analysis, deep radar imaging, sediment core sampling, DNA reconstruction, each one a way of translating the planet's silent archive. We're finding that the Earth records everything, even emotions in a way. Stress in trees, trauma in coral, resilience in soil. It remembers pressure, vibration, chemistry. If a society once reshaped the world through farming, mining, or building, the soil would reflect it. If they altered the atmosphere, the ice would capture it. The planet doesn't play favorites, it keeps everything. And so the question remains, If the Earth remembers everything, what is it trying to tell us now? Maybe it's that we're not unique, that others have walked this same path, faced the same choices, reached the same heights. Or maybe it's reminding us that forgetting is part of the cycle too, that even memory must erode for new life to grow. When you think about it, our own search for ancient civilizations is itself an act of planetary memory. We're helping the Earth remember itself. We're piecing together fragments it has hidden, giving voice to layers that can't speak on their own. Every fossil, every shard, every chemical trace we find is a line from the planet's autobiography. Whether or not those lines describe a lost civilization, they tell us something profound, that nothing truly disappears here. Everything becomes part of something else. And maybe that's what the first civilization understood. Maybe they saw themselves not as separate from the Earth, but as part of its consciousness, a fleeting pattern in its larger thought. They might have known that the real monument isn't what you build, but what you leave embedded in the world itself. The soil under our feet could still carry their imprint, not as ruins, but as balance, as order, as a faint rhythm that guided them once and guides us now. As we listen to that rhythm, the next step becomes clear. If the planet keeps its memories in stone and sediment, then the stories of those who came before might still echo in legend, in the myths that survived when everything else was lost. Those stories might not be fiction at all, but translations of geological memory into human language. And when science meets those legends, we might begin to recognize the truth hidden between them. Every culture has its stories about how the world began and how it ended once before. They tell of floods, of fire, of cities that vanished, of teachers who arrived from the stars or the sea to rebuild what was lost. For a long time, science treated these as allegories, moral lessons, symbolic explanations for natural events. Yet as our tools grow sharper and our understanding of the planet deepens, something curious keeps happening. The old stories start to sound less like imagination and more like memory. It isn't that myth and science suddenly agree. They speak different languages. Science works in data and verification. Myth works in metaphor and emotion. But both are attempts to describe the same world. And sometimes, when we listen carefully to what the stories are really saying, we find that they've been describing geological or astronomical truths all along, just in a form early humans could understand. For centuries, scholars dismissed the global flood myths as universal fantasy. Nearly every ancient society had one, the deluge that wiped the world clean, sparing only a chosen few. But in the late 20th century, geologists confirmed that massive floods did indeed reshape the planet as the last ice age ended. Sea levels rose more than 100 meters. Glacial lakes burst through ice dams and carved canyons overnight. In places like the Pacific Northwest, the Caspian region, and the Black Sea Basin, sudden inundations transformed entire landscapes. If you lived through something like that, your descendants would certainly remember. They might call it divine judgment or rebirth or a cleansing of the world. Myths preserve that memory, even when details fade. The Mesopotamian story of Utnapishtim, written thousands of years before the biblical Noah, tells of a flood that covered the land. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes the same event with uncanny familiarity. The Ark, the birds sent to find land, the mountaintop where the vessel rested. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Hebrews all told variations of the same story, echoing what may have been a real regional flood amplified into cosmic scale. Farther east, Hindu texts speak of Manu, who was warned by a fish about a coming deluge. In Greece, Deucalion survived a flood sent by Zeus to cleanse humanity. In China, Yu the Great tamed the waters after they swallowed the land. On the other side of the world, Native American and Aboriginal stories recall great floods that destroyed earlier worlds. These myths, separated by continents, align in theme and timing. They may not describe a single event, but they remember the same pattern, the planet changing suddenly and civilizations struggling to survive. When science finally confirmed that sea levels rose catastrophically around 12,000 years ago, myth and geology quietly shook hands. One was a story told in symbols, the other was data written in sediment. Both described the same transformation. That's when researchers began to look again at other myths, not as fiction, but as cultural records of real events filtered through time. Volcanoes, for example, inspired countless legends of gods dwelling beneath mountains. The Greek Hephaestus, the Polynesian Pele, the Japanese Kagetsuchi, all fiery deities born of eruption. When archaeologists studied the timelines of ancient eruptions, they found that many coincided with the earliest versions of these myths. Whole civilizations watched mountains explode, ash darkening the sky, the earth trembling beneath their feet. Without modern instruments, myth was their science, their way of understanding forces beyond control. And in that sense, those stories are not wrong. They're eyewitness accounts translated into the language of reverence. Even celestial myths often hold surprising accuracy. Ancient peoples described the movements of the stars, planets, and comets with poetic precision. In Australia, Aboriginal constellations align with seasonal cycles still relevant to navigation and agriculture. In the Americas, Mayan astronomers tracked Venus and Mars so precisely that their calendars rival modern calculations. Greek myths about Orion, Perseus, and Andromeda preserve the arrangement of constellations as they appeared thousands of years ago. When we decode them with astronomical software, we realize those stories were timestamps, oral records of the night sky frozen in mythic form. There's also the question of lost lands, perhaps the most persistent theme of all. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. Names that carry the weight of nostalgia for a forgotten world. Plato's tale of Atlantis remains the most famous, but his version wasn't the first. Many earlier cultures told similar stories of island empires destroyed by water or fire. What fascinates researchers is that these legends often point to periods of real geological upheaval. Times when entire regions did, in fact, sink beneath rising seas. The Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, the Caribbean Basin, the North Atlantic, all once hosted vast coastal plains now drowned. When the Ice Age ended, those lands vanished within generations. The survivors would have watched their world collapse into the sea. In myth, they became the ancestors of new peoples, carrying fragments of lost knowledge inland. Of course, not every legend corresponds neatly to a scientific event. Some are layers of imagination built atop older truths, but the pattern is there. Myth tends to preserve memory long after physical evidence disappears. Oral cultures, especially, use story as a way to encode practical knowledge. A tale about a serpent in the river might warn of dangerous currents. A god who punishes hubris might be a metaphor for natural balance. And a myth about a vanished golden age could be a distant recollection of real prosperity before catastrophe struck. Science approaches these stories cautiously, not to confirm them literally, but to see what they reveal about human observation. For example, studies of Aboriginal Australian myths show they accurately describe coastlines as they were 12,000 years ago before rising seas redrew them. Those stories have been passed down unbroken for hundreds of generations, an oral record of geological change unmatched by any written chronicle. Similarly, Polynesian navigation chants encode detailed star maps and ocean routes. When anthropologists compared them to modern GPS data, they found remarkable consistency. These weren't primitive fictions, they were tools for survival, knowledge disguised as narrative. What happens then, when myth and science meet in the middle, when each helps the other remember? It becomes a dialogue across time. Science brings instruments, myth brings continuity. One provides measurement, the other meaning. Together, they allow us to see that history is not a straight line, but a braid of observation, disaster, and recollection. In recent years, researchers in fields as diverse as archaeology, climatology, and anthropology have begun collaborating with storytellers and elders from indigenous cultures to reconstruct local histories. In doing so, they have confirmed details once thought impossible. Volcanic eruptions dated to the exact generation preserved in myth, coastlines remembered from when they lay far offshore, and star positions described precisely as they appeared millennia ago. Myth, it seems, is a resilient form of data compression. It stores information in rhythm, image, and repetition, the way memory naturally prefers. Sometimes, though, the overlap between myth and evidence becomes difficult to explain through coincidence alone. Certain stories mention stars or celestial events that correspond to positions we can now date astronomically, positions that haven't existed for tens of thousands of years. The Egyptian myth of Osiris and Isis mirrors the rising of Orion's belt and Sirius at a time far earlier than Egypt's official history. In South America, the Inca myths of Viracocha describe a god emerging after a great flood to teach people architecture and astronomy, remarkably similar to Mesopotamian tales of Oannes, who did the same on the other side of the world. These parallels may simply reflect the universal human impulse to explain civilization as a gift from beyond, but they could also hint that both regions inherited the same story from a deeper, older source. The idea that memory can survive in story longer than in stone isn't hard to grasp. Language evolves slowly, but emotion, awe, fear, reverence, carries messages intact. When entire generations repeat a story every season, it becomes self-preserving. A single detail, like the timing of the stars or the sound of the sea, can stay accurate for thousands of years because the story depends on it. Myth keeps the facts alive without ever calling them facts. Some scientists resist this blending of myth and evidence, and rightly so. The line between pattern recognition and imagination is thin. Yet it is also true that myth often guides discovery. Heinrich Schliemann found Troy by following Homer's verses. Archaeologists in Crete used legends of Minos to uncover the palace of Knossos. Even the search for meteor impacts and ancient craters has been guided by indigenous tales describing fire from the sky. Each time, myth pointed the way long before data confirmed it. Perhaps what's happening is not that myth predicts science, but that both draw from the same underlying reality. One emotional, one analytical. The Earth experiences an event, humanity interprets it. The story lasts longer than the evidence, so when science finally catches up, it feels like rediscovery. If a first civilization once existed, its legacy might live not in surviving structures, but in the myths that refuse to die. Over millennia, their details would shift, Their heroes change names, their geography blur. Yet the core idea, a lost world of knowledge destroyed by disaster, would persist. Atlantis might be just one version of that recurring theme, a symbolic stand-in for every civilization the planet has forgotten. The myth survives because it speaks to something universal, the fear of loss and the longing to remember. In this way, science and legend become two halves of the same act of remembrance. Science digs downward, peeling back layers of earth and ice. Legend moves upward, carrying meaning through generations. Where they meet, the past briefly becomes visible again, like a reflection on still water. For a moment, we can see both what was real and what was remembered, overlapping perfectly. And when that happens, something subtle shifts. The question changes from, did this really happen, to what are we remembering? Maybe the stories we call myths are humanity's version of the Earth's geological record, an emotional sediment built up over time. Just as rocks preserve eruptions and extinctions, stories preserve fears, triumphs, and discoveries. Both are records of experience, one written in stone, the other in language. As we continue to explore this intersection, we start to realize that the border between history and myth is porous. Every scientific discovery about our ancient past seems to echo something already whispered by old stories. The flood, the lost land, the sky gods, the rebirth of civilization, all part of the same cycle, repeated in human and planetary memory alike. So perhaps the real task isn't to separate science from legend, but to let them inform each other. Science keeps us honest. Legend keeps us connected. The first looks outward for proof, the second looks inward for continuity. Together, they might help us glimpse the whole truth, the truth that includes the physical world and the emotional one, the evidence we can measure and the memory we can feel. And as this quiet investigation continues, as we trace the fingerprints of lost ages through both data and story, another question emerges. If ancient myths preserve real memories, then what else might they contain? Could they hold instructions? Fragments of knowledge meant to survive even when everything else fell apart? If so, then perhaps those ancient builders, those vanished teachers, left more than ruins and legends. Maybe they left blueprints, ideas embedded in myth and symbol, waiting for us to decode them. That is where the path begins to lead next, toward the idea that those who came before might have been more than storytellers. They may have been engineers, scientists, astronomers, and philosophers whose work still influences us, hidden in plain sight. To find them, we'll have to look not in libraries or temples, but in the logic of the structures themselves, in the technologies and methods that seem impossibly advanced for their age. And so, as science and legend continue their quiet conversation, we follow that thread deeper into the domain of the forgotten engineers, the ones who might have built the world we inherited, then vanished into its memory. The more we study the ruins of the ancient world, the more they begin to feel less like remnants and more like riddles. They are too precise, too enduring, too deliberate to be dismissed as primitive. And yet, according to everything we've been taught about history, they shouldn't exist in the form they do. The question that hangs quietly behind them isn't just who built this or why, but how. That simple word, how, carries the weight of centuries of wonder. How did our ancestors move 100-ton blocks of stone without cranes or engines? How did they cut granite as if it were soft clay? How did they design structures so perfectly aligned that even modern engineers hesitate to replicate them? The answers we've offered over the years have ranged from the imaginative to the mathematical, from myth to physics. Some explanations invoke lost technologies, others the ingenuity of mass labor and observation. But as we look closer, the puzzle doesn't shrink, it deepens. Each discovery reveals a level of sophistication that seems out of step with the era we've assigned it. Maybe we've underestimated how capable ancient people were. Or maybe, just maybe, they were inheriting methods from those who came before. The phrase forgotten engineers doesn't have to mean aliens or supernatural intervention. It could mean something simpler and in a way more astonishing. Humans, just like us, who mastered techniques and principles that later generations lost. Civilization isn't a straight line. It's a series of rises and falls. Knowledge grows, collapses and grows again, like waves, erasing and redrawing the shoreline. The first engineers might not have been the first humans, but the first to think of the earth itself as something that could be shaped with purpose. When you walk through the ruins of places like Baalbek in Lebanon, you feel that presence immediately. The temple complex there sits atop massive stone foundations, some weighing over 1,000 tons each. The largest, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, lies partly quarried, still attached to the bedrock. Even with modern equipment, lifting such blocks would be a monumental challenge. And yet someone, thousands of years ago, not only carved them, but placed them precisely into the foundation with near-perfect leveling. The Romans later built temples on top of this platform, but even they seem to treat the older stones as a mystery. Relics of an earlier age they could admire but not fully replicate. Similar feats appear across the world. In Egypt, the granite blocks of the Great Pyramid's king's chamber fit so snugly that you can't slide a sheet of paper between them. In Peru, at Sacsayhuaman, irregular stones interlock like puzzle pieces, each face carved with subtle curvature that matches its neighbors exactly. At Pumapunku, massive andesite blocks feature intricate grooves, channels and right angles as if shaped by machines. In India, the ancient stepwells of Gujarat descend hundreds of feet underground in symmetrical spirals that still stand perfectly balanced after 1,000 years of earthquakes. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat stone blocks, hauled from miles away, fit together so precisely that mortar was unnecessary. None of these places share culture or chronology, yet they share precision. A universal signature of builders who understood something fundamental about weight, pressure, and material behavior. When engineers today analyze those works, they notice details that go beyond artistry. The stones are not random, they're tuned. Some seem placed to distribute seismic stress, others to manage water flow, others to resist erosion. It's as if their builders knew that structures must adapt to the planet's movements. In Japan and South America, certain megalithic sites even employ similar polygonal masonry. Interlocking irregular blocks that flex slightly during earthquakes preventing collapse. That's not a guess. It's engineering insight, and the fact that it appears on opposite sides of the world suggests either shared heritage or shared rediscovery of the same principle. Another forgotten technique involves acoustic design. Many ancient temples amplify or resonate sound in ways that suggest intentional tuning. The hypogeum of Halsaflini in Malta, carved entirely underground over 5,000 years ago, vibrates at a frequency that affects the human body. When someone chants within it, the entire chamber hums, creating a sensation that feels almost physical. In the Mayan pyramid of Kukulkan, A clap in front of the staircase produces an echo resembling the chirp of the sacred Quetzal bird, a sound effect engineered by its step geometry. Egyptian chambers, Incan walls, even stone circles in Britain display similar acoustic awareness. These were not accidental quirks of architecture. They were deliberate choices made by builders who understood how sound moves through space. This raises the question, how did they learn it? Without formal science, without written acoustics or physics, how did they refine such precision? The simplest answer is experimentation, generations of builders learning through observation. But that kind of experimentation requires continuity, a stable tradition of knowledge passed down unbroken. History shows how easily such continuity breaks. Libraries burn, empires collapse, oral traditions fade. What if the original source of that knowledge predates the cultures we credit with it? Even more mysterious are the tools themselves, or rather, their absence. Archaeologists have found copper chisels near Egyptian quarries. Yet granite's hardness would dull those instantly. At sites like Giza and Aswan, perfectly straight cuts and boreholes appear in stone that would require diamond-tipped tools or mechanical drills today. The precision of these cuts, smooth, uniform, spiraled, doesn't match what copper or simple abrasion could achieve. Theories range from lost alloys to unknown techniques involving vibration or sound. In some experiments, modern researchers have used acoustic levitation or ultrasonic cutting to shape stone with minimal friction. It's tempting to imagine that the ancients might have discovered simpler versions of these methods, techniques efficient enough to leave little trace, forgotten after catastrophe or disuse. Ancient engineering also shows an understanding of geography and astronomy that feels almost scientific. The builders of Giza, for example, align their monuments not only to the cardinal directions, but to the positions of stars that would have been visible 12,000 years ago. The layout of the pyramids mirrors the belt of Orion. The Nile's curve matches the Milky Way's. In South America, lines and monuments align to solstices, lunar cycles, and even magnetic north. These alignments suggest an awareness of the planet as a system, a structure that moves, breathes, and cycles. That kind of awareness usually comes only after long observation or inherited charts. In many ancient myths, knowledge is said to come from those who came before, gods, sages, builders, or teachers, figures who arrive after disaster to restore order. The Sumerians credited the Anunnaki, the Egyptians, the god Thoth, the Maya, Kukulkan, the Inca, Viracocha. Each culture described these beings as wise, human-like, and technologically advanced. They taught agriculture, writing, mathematics, and building. They didn't conquer, they instructed. Whether literal or symbolic, these stories might describe the same historical phenomenon, a remnant population of skilled survivors spreading knowledge after a collapse. To later peoples, their mastery would appear divine. That's the haunting idea behind the forgotten engineers, that what we call the beginning of civilization was actually a reboot, a rediscovery of knowledge once widespread but then scattered. If an earlier civilization fell, it might have left behind travelers, builders, astronomers, healers who passed fragments of understanding to the hunter-gatherers who came after. Those fragments became myth, ritual, and architecture. Over generations, the techniques survived, but their origins faded. The students forgot the names of their teachers. In modern times, we see this process happening in smaller ways. When an ancient technology is lost, Roman concrete, Damascus steel, Greek fire, it's not because the knowledge was impossible, but because it was fragile. It depended on specific materials, conditions, and secrets guarded by small groups. Once those groups disappeared, so did the craft. Multiply that by millennia and it's easy to imagine entire sciences evaporating after a global catastrophe. If such engineers existed before us, they might have left their signatures not just in structures but in design principles that endure subconsciously. Geometry, symmetry, harmonic ratios all seem innate to human creativity. We find them beautiful without always knowing why. The golden ratio appears in ancient temples, Renaissance art, and modern architecture alike. It might be instinct or it might be inheritance. The echo of lessons learned so long ago that they've become part of our intuition. Even agriculture shows signs of forgotten engineering. The world's oldest known irrigation systems in Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley demonstrate understanding of hydraulics and soil chemistry. Terraced farming in the Andes uses designs that regulate temperature and moisture through microclimates, an efficiency hard to improve upon even today. Some ancient wells in India still draw clean water through systems of filtration built into their stone linings. These are not the works of trial and error alone. They are optimized. They suggest testing, iteration, and data, though their data was measured in seasons, not spreadsheets. When we look at the past through this lens, we see not mystery for mystery's sake, but continuity. The same curiosity that drives modern science drove ancient builders. The same desire to make things last, to understand nature, to balance form and function. The forgotten engineers might not have vanished completely. Their knowledge might have diffused into the DNA of civilization itself. There's another possibility, quieter but equally profound. Maybe the first engineers didn't use technology as we define it. Maybe their mastery lay in understanding natural forces so deeply that they could work with them instead of against them. They might have used sound to move stone, resonance to shape materials, or magnetism to guide design. Such methods would leave almost no physical residue, but their results could endure for millennia. Modern science has begun exploring these possibilities, from the resonant frequencies of minerals to the potential for low-energy shaping techniques. Each discovery brings us a step closer to understanding how the ancients might have achieved what they did without the tools we expect. If we could speak to them now, perhaps they'd tell us that technology doesn't have to mean machines, that progress doesn't always require steel. It can mean harmony, using the rhythms of the planet as tools. Their legacy might not be lost inventions but the philosophy behind them, that the earth itself is an instrument and those who learn its tones can build anything. We tend to think of progress as linear, but maybe it's cyclical. Maybe the forgotten engineers weren't the first, just the latest in a repeating pattern. Every few ages knowledge accumulates, reaches a peak, then resets. The next generation rediscovers it, calling it new. The builders of tomorrow might look back at our skyscrapers and wonder the same thing we wonder about theirs. How did they do it? Even now, echoes of their work remain underfoot, in stones that defy erosion, in walls that hum with sound, in alignments that track stars no longer visible. Each structure is a quiet message across time, saying that intelligence has walked here before. We may not know their names or languages, but we know their thoughts. They wanted permanence in an impermanent world. They wanted to leave something that would outlast memory. As we study their work, we're not just solving engineering puzzles. We're remembering a relationship with the earth that they might have understood better than we do, one that treats construction as collaboration, not domination. That understanding could be their true legacy, the lesson buried beneath all the stone and myth. And as we follow their traces, the question deepens. If they built with such foresight, did they know what would come? Did they leave messages for us? Not warnings carved in words, but patterns, alignments and codes meant to be found when we were ready to see them? Maybe their greatest work wasn't a temple or a pyramid, but the act of communication itself. A design meant to survive not just weather and time, but forgetfulness. And that's where this quiet exploration naturally leads next, into the idea that those ancient builders may have left something behind intentionally, messages carved not in language but in geometry, meant for a future civilization that would one day look up from its own ruins and finally understand. If you wanted to speak to the future, how would you do it? Not to someone a year or a decade from now, but to minds thousands of years ahead. People who won't share your language, your symbols, or maybe even your biology. How would you send a message across that kind of time? A book would decay, a recording would corrode, a satellite would drift, even the most durable materials crumble eventually. The only real medium that endures is the earth itself, stone, soil, geometry, and sky. Perhaps that's why the ancients chose them, not just to build but to speak. If a first civilization existed, and if it foresaw its own end, it might have tried to leave something behind, not in the form of monuments for worship but as instructions or reminders. It might have known that its knowledge would fade, that memory would break, and that someday another people would rise and look for meaning in the ruins. To reach them, the builders would need to use a universal language, one that doesn't depend on words. Mathematics, proportion, and pattern would become their alphabet. Across the world, ancient monuments seem to carry the same message. Pay attention to the sky, to the cycles, to the balance of earth and stars. The Great Pyramid points almost perfectly north, aligning with the planet's axis as though declaring here is the center of understanding. The Mayan temples chart the equinoxes, telling future generations when the world turns. Stone circles mark the solstices, reminding us that time itself can be measured without clocks. These aren't coincidences, they are teachings frozen in architecture. Every alignment, every ratio, every shadow cast at a certain moment of the year is a form of communication. A message saying, we knew this, we wanted you to know it too. Some scholars see the world's ancient monuments as part of a planetary network, each one contributing a piece to a larger map. The Nazca lines in Peru, visible only from above, form geometric patterns and animals stretching for kilometers across the desert. The scale makes little sense unless seen from the air, which has led to endless speculation. But perhaps they weren't meant to be seen by gods or pilots. Perhaps they were made to endure, vast and simple, resistant to erosion. Their purpose clear only when the technology existed again to view them from the sky. Maybe the builders knew that time would eventually give us that perspective. Even the layout of ancient sites suggests intentional communication. Giza's pyramids mirror Orion's belt. The same pattern echoed in monuments across the globe. Some researchers propose that these alignments were not just symbolic but literal. Markers meant to synchronize earthly coordinates with celestial ones. The message in that case wouldn't be, we worshiped the stars, but we understood the system. A civilization capable of such synchronization was effectively leaving behind a cosmic address, a fixed point in the vast turning of time. If we take that idea seriously, then ancient monuments could be more than tombs or temples. They could be memory devices, ways of storing knowledge physically, in relationships between shape and proportion. The Great Pyramid, for instance, encodes mathematical constants pi, phi, the Earth's circumference, and even the ratio of its distance to the Sun. Whether by coincidence or design, these relationships suggest a deliberate attempt to connect architecture to universal measurements. Whoever designed it seemed to know that certain numbers never change, that they would mean the same thing to any intelligent being, no matter the era. That's what makes them ideal carriers of information. Modern scientists have tried similar approaches. When we sent the Voyager probes into space, we attached golden records carrying basic information about Earth. Our location in relation to pulsars, a map of our solar system, the composition of our atmosphere, and sounds of our world. All of it was encoded in mathematics and physical constants, the only language we expect alien minds to understand. If a future civilization ever found those probes, it could decode them without knowing our culture. Now imagine a civilization doing the same on Earth, not through spacecraft but through stone. They might have embedded the same principles, planetary data, astronomical ratios, constants of physics, into monuments meant to last through cataclysm. What makes this idea compelling is that we already see hints of it. Many ancient temples, pyramids, and megaliths incorporate ratios that reflect planetary orbits, the tilt of the Earth and lunar cycles. The builders didn't just align their structures with stars, they embedded celestial mechanics into the dimensions themselves. The result is architecture that doubles as a textbook, teaching through form rather than inscription. Even if language vanished, the lesson would survive. Some monuments might even encode time itself. The Mayan long count calendar measures vast cycles known as backtons, totaling over 5,000 years each. The builders of Angkor Wat used similar numerical symbolism tied to astronomical ages. In Egypt, the Sphinx faces due east, greeting the rising sun as it moves through the zodiac over millennia. Each alignment changes slowly with the precession of the equinoxes, as if the monument were a clock designed to tick once every 26,000 years. Such precision suggests a message meant not for immediate use, but for distant descendants, perhaps a way to mark when the next great cycle or catastrophe would occur. Even the myths that accompany these structures often sound like instructions disguised as stories. The Egyptian Book of the Dead describes how the soul must navigate a series of gates and tests before reaching eternity, each one corresponding to real constellations and physical directions. The Mayan Popol Vuh speaks of creation and destruction cycles, echoing the same astronomical patterns. In India, the Vedas encode astronomical data within mythic narrative, deities representing planets, battles symbolizing solstices and eclipses. These aren't random correlations. They suggest that myths, monuments, and mathematics once worked together as one system, a way of recording and transmitting cosmic knowledge through generations. But if these were messages, who were they meant for? Some say the gods, others the dead, others future humans. Maybe all three mean the same thing. Gods might simply mean those yet to come, the future itself. The builders might have known that their civilization would fall, but trusted that another would rise. They couldn't preserve their words, but they could their understanding. In that sense, every monument becomes a letter to whoever finds it next, saying, "We were here, we learned this much, don't forget." This kind of message doesn't need to be obvious. In fact, subtlety might be the point. If the goal was to ensure that only a society advanced enough to rediscover scientific knowledge could understand the message, then it would make sense to encode it in complex geometry. A primitive culture might see a temple, a future civilization might see a map of the heavens, a model of orbital resonance, or a warning about cycles of catastrophe. It's the same logic we use today when designing nuclear waste warnings. symbols meant to say danger to civilizations that might exist tens of thousands of years from now. The message isn't in the words, but in the universal patterns of shape and fear. In a way, those ancient builders might have been facing the same question we do now. How do you make knowledge last? We try to store ours in digital form, a fragile method compared to stone. A single solar flare or shift in magnetic field could erase our entire archive. But geometry doesn't need electricity. Stone doesn't need maintenance. The message they left, if it exists, was designed to outlast every language, every empire, every species. It's possible that we're already decoding it without realizing it. Every time we measure an ancient monument and find its astronomical precision, we're reading part of their sentence. Every time we find the same ratio repeated across continents, we're hearing their emphasis. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding what they were trying to say. Maybe their message wasn't about survival or catastrophe, but about continuity, about the idea that knowledge once found should never truly be lost again. Some believe the Earth itself is part of the message, that these ancient structures, placed along fault lines, magnetic nodes, and latitude harmonics, were designed to stabilize or harmonize the planet's energy, an early form of geoengineering rooted in balance rather than control. It's hard to prove, but the thought is intriguing. It suggests a worldview where architecture isn't just physical, but ecological, where every design participates in the rhythm of the planet. If true, then their message to us might be simple. Remember how to build with nature, not against it. In our own time, we've begun to rediscover the need for that wisdom. Modern engineers study ancient architecture to learn why it survives earthquakes and floods better than many contemporary buildings. Scientists analyze Roman concrete to understand how it self-heals through mineral reactions. Farmers return to ancient irrigation techniques that waste no water. Every rediscovery is a reply to the messages left long ago, not in words, but in enduring design. If the first civilization did leave something intentional, maybe it wasn't one monument or one code. Maybe it was the pattern itself, the global network of sites, all built to echo the same principles. Taken together, they form a kind of planetary inscription, too large to see from the ground, visible only when we map the entire Earth. In that sense, the message might be, look at the whole. Don't study one ruin in isolation. Connect them. When you do, the pattern emerges. And what does that pattern say? Perhaps it says that the universe operates on cycles, that civilizations rise and fall with the rhythm of the Earth's heartbeat, and that each one leaves clues for the next. Maybe it says that intelligence is not an endpoint, but a process, something the planet itself keeps rediscovering through us. The builders might have understood that they couldn't stop time, but they could synchronize with it, and by doing so, leave behind a map not of space, but of wisdom. There's another way to read their message. Maybe they weren't speaking to us at all, but to themselves, to the future version of their own kind after the next reset. Perhaps they knew the world would change, seas would rise, memory would fade, and humanity would forget. So they built reminders, hoping that when civilization rose again, someone would recognize the pattern, feel that strange familiarity, and realize that this has all happened before. It's not a warning or prophecy, it's a reassurance that forgetting is temporary, that knowledge always returns. When you think about it, we're doing the same thing right now. Our satellites, our probes, our archives, our digital clouds, all are messages to the future, or to whoever might find them. We too are carving our understanding into the fabric of the planet, in data and infrastructure instead of stone. Maybe that's just what intelligent species do, they build to remember, and just like those who came before, we can't be sure who will receive our message or whether they'll understand it. If the ancient builders could see us now, studying their works with lasers and drones, rediscovering the alignments they designed, maybe they'd feel the satisfaction of being heard. The communication worked, it just took 12,000 years for the reply to arrive. As we continue listening, we begin to sense that their messages might not have been technical at all, they might have been philosophical. Their true meaning might not be we had advanced knowledge, but we understood our place. Every monument, every line, every alignment might be reminding us of something simple and profound, that we are part of a much larger system, and that harmony between earth, sky, and mind is the only form of permanence. And maybe that's the message that matters most, because after all the decoding, after all the theories and debates, what remains constant is this: they wanted to be remembered, and they wanted us to remember something about ourselves. Perhaps that we, too, are temporary but capable of greatness. That the world will forget our names, but remember our patterns. That the knowledge we leave behind will someday awaken in others, just as theirs has awakened in us. As the search continues, the story begins to shift from what they left to what we're leaving. The next step in this long reflection moves towards silence, toward what happens when knowledge fades, when civilizations fall quiet and the messages of the past wait, once again to be rediscovered. When a civilization ends, it doesn't happen all at once. The world doesn't stop turning, the stars don't blink out, the air doesn't grow still. What fades first is the noise, the hum of creation, the rhythm of work, the steady pulse of thought that once connected thousands of minds moving toward a shared purpose. Silence comes slowly, like dusk spreading across a landscape. It arrives in moments too quiet to notice: a workshop abandoned, a library left locked, a bridge that no one repairs. And then, one morning, the city wakes up for the last time and doesn't know it. Every civilization in history has experienced some version of this silence. The Maya, whose calendars measured epochs, saw their cities swallowed by jungle. The Romans, who believed their empire eternal, left amphitheaters to crumble into earth. The Indus Valley people, whose streets were so well planned that modern engineers still study them, vanished with barely a trace. None of them believed it would end, no one ever does. Yet the silence always comes. What makes the silence so complete is not destruction, but forgetting. The physical remains persist, stone, pottery, a few carvings. But the knowledge of what they meant fades. The people who come after find the ruins and give them new names. A temple becomes a tomb, a machine becomes a shrine. Over generations, the true purpose of the structure dissolves, replaced by myth and wonder. In that transformation, something both dies and is reborn. The past becomes legend, and silence becomes mystery. If a civilization existed before all others, the first, the one that may have left clues scattered across the world, then its silence must have been immense. It would have been the silence of a planet resetting itself, of oceans rising, of skies darkening, of cities erased. To imagine it is to imagine time itself pausing for breath. What kind of world would that have been? How much would it take to erase nearly every trace of an advanced society? Perhaps not as much as we think. The Earth is efficient at forgetting. Within a few hundred years, nature reclaims everything. Roads crumble, forests return, metal rusts, glass turns to dust. In 10,000 years, almost nothing we've built would remain recognizable. Even our tallest towers would be reduced to mounds of debris buried under new soil. In 100,000 years, the continents themselves would have shifted. Ice, wind, and water would erase all sign that we were ever here. Only the most durable materials, stone and a few metals, might survive. And even those would be worn smooth. It's humbling to realize that the silence of the earth is not empty. It's patient. The planet waits for noise to return. When the first civilization fell, if it did, the silence that followed might have lasted thousands of years. Forests grew over ruins, rivers changed course, the climate warmed and cooled. Life went on indifferent, and when new humans emerged, they found a world already old, a landscape full of shapes that didn't make sense. They might have seen those remnants and wondered who built them. They might have built their own cities on top of older ones, never knowing they were walking on the foundations of memory. Archaeologists have a phrase for this layering of history, the palimpsest. It means something written, erased, and written over again, but still faintly showing the marks of what came before. The earth is one vast palimpsest. Every civilization has written its chapter on the same pages, and each has believed it was the first. The silence between those chapters isn't absence. It's waiting. The earth holds onto the echoes until someone learns to listen again. What would that silence have felt like to those who lived through it? Imagine being one of the last survivors of a world collapsing. The sky changing color, the seasons no longer predictable, the coastlines retreating every year. Imagine carrying fragments of knowledge you can no longer use, formulas for metals that no longer exist, maps of stars obscured by ash, memories of machines that no longer function. You would tell your children what you could, but without the tools or context, those explanations would turn into stories. The world was once full of light, you'd say. Our ancestors could speak to the sky. And over generations, those descriptions would transform into myths of gods and magic. The silence would not be empty, but full of half-remembered words echoing into the next dawn. In many ways, we live in that echo still. Every flood myth, every legend of a golden age, every tale of gods descending to teach humanity could be the voice of that silence speaking to us through memory. The long quiet between civilizations doesn't erase knowledge entirely. It distills it. The facts become symbols. The equations become rituals. The technologies become stories about power and balance. And when a new civilization arises, those symbols inspire curiosity again. The cycle renews. We tend to think of silence as loss, but it also creates space. Without it, there can be no rediscovery. The centuries after a collapse are like fallow ground. Time for the planet to heal, for the next generation to begin with fresh soil. The silence of the earth is not punishment, it's restoration. Even after the greatest catastrophes, life begins again. The coral returns to reefs, trees grow over ruins, the air clears, the planet forgets the noise but keeps the lessons hidden in its layers. Perhaps that's why the clues left by a possible first civilization are so faint. They might not have been erased in anger, but gently absorbed by time. The silence was not forced, but chosen. If they foresaw the end, they might have accepted it, knowing that everything must rest before it rises again. They might have trusted that the essence of their knowledge, the part that matters most, would survive in the patterns of nature, in the instincts of humanity, in the rhythm of the world itself. The silence between civilizations might even be necessary. It's what prevents knowledge from arrogance. Every rise carries pride. Every fall brings humility. When silence comes, it humbles the planet and resets the scale of meaning. The builders vanish, but their influence remains, waiting for the next generation to discover it anew, and to marvel as if it were the first time. Modern scientists sometimes talk about the great filter, the idea that in the vast universe, civilizations might destroy themselves before they can spread too far. On Earth, the great filter might simply be silence, a period of forgetting built into the rhythm of intelligence. It ensures that no species holds power forever. It enforces balance. It teaches, in the most absolute way, that survival depends on cooperation with the planet rather than domination over it. And maybe that's the reason silence is sacred in so many cultures. The gaps between sounds are where meaning lives. The pause in music gives the notes shape. The stillness before speech carries anticipation. Silence is an absence, its potential. For the first civilization, it might have been the same. Their fall, their vanishing, might not have been defeat but transformation, a way to pass the torch without forcing the flame. When we look at the ruins of ancient worlds, we often feel a kind of sadness, as though mourning the loss of brilliance. But maybe the Earth doesn't see it that way. Maybe it sees continuity. Each silence a pause between verses in the same long song. The first civilization's silence became the background upon which ours was written. The patterns they left, the monuments, the myths, all a chord still resonating faintly beneath our own melody. In our time, we can already sense how fragile our noise is. The hum of machines, the glow of cities, the pulse of communication. Feels permanent, but it's just another verse. If the power stopped tomorrow, if the grids went dark, the silence would come back fast. Within days, the sky would grow clearer, the stars sharper. Within months, grass would split the pavement. Within years, the forest would take back the roads. The planet doesn't need to lift a finger, it just waits. Silence is its default state. But the thought doesn't have to be frightening. In fact, it's strangely comforting. The silence that follows is also renewal. It means the story isn't over, just changing hands. The Earth doesn't destroy, it resets. And every silence carries within it the potential for memory to return in a new form. We might be the noise that fills the latest silence. Our technology, our science, our art. All of it could be the Earth remembering itself again, speaking through us as it has before. The same impulse that built the pyramids now builds satellites. The same curiosity that mapped the stars in stone now maps them in data. We are part of the same conversation, just another voice after a long pause. The first civilization's silence might not have been a void, but a whisper, one that continues through the patterns we keep rediscovering. When we align our monuments to the stars, when we study ancient myths for hidden truths, when we listen to the planet's deep rhythms, we are answering that whisper. We are continuing the dialogue. And someday we too will fall quiet. Our cities will fade, our data will vanish, and our monuments will crumble. The silence will return. But if we've learned anything from those who came before, it's that silence doesn't mean the end. It means that the Earth is preparing to speak again, in a new voice, through new hands. Somewhere, deep underground or beneath the sea, the record of our time will settle into the planet's memory. A thin layer of chemical signatures, a dusting of artifacts, a few stubborn structures that resist decay. One day, far in the future, another civilization might find them and wonder who we were. They'll study our ruins, trace our alignments, decode our myths. They'll find patterns that feel strangely familiar. And when they do, they'll realize what we're realizing now. That we're all part of the same story, told over and over, separated only by long silences. It's easy to think of silence as final, but maybe it's more like rest. The pause between breaths, the stillness before dawn. The first civilization's silence was deep, but not empty. It was the seedbed for everything that followed. We are living proof that the silence worked, that memory returned, that knowledge can be reborn. And somewhere, perhaps even now, the next silence is waiting, patient as ever. Not a threat, but a promise, that when our noise fades, the earth will listen, remember, and begin again. And so the story continues, softly, through the spaces between what was said and what was left unsaid, through the long quiet that always follows creation. Because in the end, silence isn't what happens when the story stops. It's what allows the next one to begin. Somewhere between the past and the future, in the long quiet space that joins them, there are people who listen. They're not prophets or mystics, not dreamers chasing fantasies, but scientists, explorers, and thinkers trying to hear what the earth is still whispering. The searchers of today. They walk across deserts, dive beneath the sea, scan the ground from satellites, and map the invisible. Their tools are new, but their mission is ancient to remember. When an archaeologist kneels in the dust and brushes dirt from a piece of stone, they are doing something profoundly human. They are not just uncovering objects, they are decoding memory. The fragment they hold might have been shaped by someone 10,000 years ago, or 100,000. This touch that carved it might have belonged to a hand like theirs, guided by the same curiosity. And in that moment, the distance between them collapses. The searcher and the maker share the same impulse, to know, to leave something behind that will be understood. Modern archaeology has changed the way we think about time. The old image of explorers digging with shovels has been replaced by drones, satellites, and scanners. We can now see beneath jungles, deserts, and oceans without disturbing a grain of sand. LiDAR, a form of laser mapping, can strip away vegetation and reveal the ghost outlines of lost cities. In Central America, LiDAR scans have uncovered vast networks of roads and temples hidden under the rainforest canopy. Cities so large that they rivaled modern capitals. What looked like wilderness was once civilization. The silence between then and now was only a few meters of soil. In the Mediterranean, sonar and submersible drones are charting the seafloor, mapping submerged coastlines that once were dry land. Each scan redraws the edge of history. Scientists are finding traces of ancient rivers, harbors, and even entire settlements beneath the waves. Some may be from known civilizations swallowed by time. Others might belong to something older, something unrecorded. The ocean, once a barrier, has become a new frontier for memory. On land, ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures beneath modern cities, older walls under newer ones, forgotten roads under familiar streets. Sometimes the pattern of a vanished settlement lies directly beneath a modern neighborhood, the layers of time stacked so neatly that past and present coexist without ever touching. Every scan, every excavation adds another thread to the tapestry of human history, but the picture keeps expanding faster than we can understand it. What's remarkable about the searchers of today is not just their technology, but their patience. To spend years on a single excavation, to catalog a single artifact, to test a single hypothesis, requires a kind of devotion that borders on reverence. These scientists know that what they're uncovering isn't just information, it's identity. They're rediscovering us, the version of ourselves that existed long before we learned to record. The work is slow, meticulous, and often thankless. For every discovery that makes headlines, there are thousands of careful observations filed quietly in journals and databases. Yet each small finding reshapes the story. The lines we once drew between primitive and advanced, between myth and fact, blur a little more with every new piece of evidence. It's becoming clear that our ancestors were not simple or ignorant. They were observant, inventive, and deeply attuned to the world around them. The searchers are also learning that history is not just buried in the ground. It's encoded in genes, in languages, in climate records, in ocean sediments. Geneticists trace ancient migrations through DNA, revealing how early humans spread across continents. Linguists reconstruct proto-languages that connect modern speech to prehistoric thought. Paleoclimatologists read tree rings and ice cores, learning when droughts and floods shaped human destiny. Each discipline becomes a kind of archaeology, unearthing memory in its own medium. In this way, the modern search for the past is no longer just physical, it's digital and molecular. We can now sequence the DNA of a fossilized tooth, reconstructing the face of someone who lived 40,000 years ago. We can simulate ancient climates, recreate extinct ecosystems, and model how early cities functioned. It's as though the silence of the earth is being translated into data, the whispers of stone turned into code. The ancient world is reappearing, pixel by pixel, under the steady gaze of technology. But the more we uncover, the more questions emerge. Every new discovery seems to stretch the timeline backward. We find structures older than expected, tools more advanced than they should be, and cultural connections that defy the limits of known migration. Each piece of evidence adds depth to the idea that civilization may not have begun once, but many times that humanity's rise is not a singular miracle, but a recurring event. Some searchers go further. They study the anomalies, artifacts that don't fit, alignments that can't be coincidence, myths that mirror physical geography too precisely to ignore. They are cautious, knowing that the line between discovery and speculation is thin, but they also understand that progress depends on curiosity, on the willingness to ask questions that others might dismiss. Without that curiosity, we would never have found the ruins under the jungle or the cities beneath the sea. In labs and universities, researchers use machine learning to scan satellite imagery for geometric patterns that might signal human design. Artificial intelligence now combs through mountains of data looking for regularities, grids, alignments, angles too precise to be natural. In recent years, such systems have flagged hundreds of potential archaeological sites previously overlooked by human eyes. The planet viewed through this new lens seems more crowded with memory than ever. And yet, amid all the technology, the most important part of the search remains human intuition, the feeling that something about a landscape is deliberate, that a certain formation of rocks or a curve of terrain carries intention. Many discoveries still begin with a hunch, a person standing on a ridge, looking out, sensing the ghost of structure in the way the sunlight hits the ground. The tools confirm what the heart already suspects, that the earth is full of messages waiting to be understood. Not all searchers are scientists. Some are storytellers, historians, explorers, and even ordinary people following curiosity. Divers exploring coastal shelves, photographers capturing patterns in satellite maps, hikers noticing alignments between mountains and stars. Each one contributes in their own way to the collective act of remembering. This global curiosity, the shared impulse to uncover, to understand, may be the clearest sign that the old message left by the first builders has reached us. The conversation they began hasn't ended. It simply moved to a new frequency. There's something poetic about how science now collaborates with imagination. Once we divided them, fact on one side, myth on the other, they now inform each other again. A geologist listens to local legend before searching for a lost city. An astronomer studies myths to interpret ancient observatories. An anthropologist consults indigenous elders before digging a site. The result is not mysticism, but respect. It's an acknowledgement that knowledge has many forms, and that memory is sometimes preserved better in story than in stone. The searchers of today are, in a way, custodians of the Earth's memory. They stand between silence and speech, translating what the planet has kept hidden into understanding. Their discoveries remind us that history is not static. It's alive, constantly shifting, always incomplete. Every find revises the story, not because the past changes, but because our ability to listen improves. When an archaeologist dusts off an ancient tool or a diver photographs a submerged staircase, they're doing more than revealing what was lost. They're repairing the thread between eras. They're saying, without words, that the silence is over for now, that the Earth's memories have been heard again. Each discovery is a reply to the builders of the past, a signal returned across thousands of years. We found you, but even as they uncover more than ever before, the searchers are haunted by the scale of what remains hidden. For every site mapped, countless others lie beneath the ocean floors or within mountains. Some may never be found. The ocean, especially, guards its secrets fiercely. The deeper we go, the stranger and older the world becomes. The sediments there hold layers of history we haven't begun to read. Perhaps somewhere in that darkness, the last physical traces of the first civilization still rest, silent, intact, waiting. The irony is that as we get better at remembering the past, we're also erasing parts of it faster than ever. Construction, mining, deforestation, and climate change are exposing and destroying ancient sites at the same time. The desert winds reveal ruins that are then swallowed by development. The melting of glaciers exposes artifacts that quickly decay once touched by air. The race between discovery and loss grows tighter each year. The searchers know this. That's why their work carries both excitement and sadness. The thrill of finding something new and the grief of realizing how much has already gone. Still, they keep going, because every uncovered artifact, every reconstructed story is another victory against oblivion. Each discovery adds to the collective memory of humanity, a memory that stretches backward beyond the limits of our imagination. In that sense, archaeology isn't about the past at all. It's about continuity. It's about proving that even after silence, something always remains. What makes the searchers of today remarkable is that they're not just looking backward. They're also asking what comes next. If civilizations rise and fall in cycles, if the earth keeps resetting, what will future searchers find of us? What traces are we leaving for them? Our monuments are fragile, our data temporary, but perhaps they'll find the same thing we're finding now. That curiosity itself is the strongest form of memory. That the desire to understand is what keeps the story alive. In that way, the work of the searchers becomes a bridge between ages. They are not merely uncovering the forgotten. They are preparing the ground for those who will one day rediscover us. The pattern continues. Build, fall, rediscover, build again. Each generation takes its turn listening to the earth, speaking back to it, leaving clues for the next. So maybe the real message of the searchers isn't about discovery at all. Maybe it's about continuity, about the shared work of remembering. They remind us that knowledge isn't owned by any single era. It belongs to the planet. It flows through time, through silence, through us. Every scanner beam, every sonar pulse, every whisper of a brush against soil is the same gesture repeated endlessly through history. The touch of curiosity upon the face of the unknown. And perhaps, in that quiet devotion, we're honoring the first civilization in the only way that matters. By doing exactly what they did. By listening to the earth. By studying the stars. By building and rebuilding meaning from fragments. By ensuring that, even after another silence, the story will continue. Somewhere, deep in a lab, a computer hums through terabytes of ancient data. On a mountainside, a lone researcher maps a line of stones at sunset. Beneath the ocean, a submersible glides over what looks like the edge of a wall. Each of them, whether they know it or not, is part of the same mission. They are the searchers of today, the latest keepers of memory, still asking the oldest question of all. Who were we, and what did we leave for those yet to come? And as that question lingers, so does the next step in this story. The one that waits beyond discovery, in the part of time we haven't reached yet. The world that will inherit everything we've learned, and everything we've forgotten. The next rise after the next silence. The ones who will one day look back at us, the same way we look back now, searching for meaning in the dust. There's a quiet dialogue that runs through history, older than language and wider than civilization. It isn't spoken aloud, yet it never truly stops. It's the conversation between humanity and the earth, between what is built and what endures, between memory and forgetting, between sound and silence. Every stone set in place, every myth retold, every map drawn, and every question asked is part of that same exchange. We think of history as a timeline, but maybe it's more like an echo chamber. One voice fading as another rises, each calling out into time, each answering the last without realizing it. The searchers of today are only the latest speakers in that conversation. Before them were the architects of forgotten worlds, the storytellers who turned memory into myth, the survivors who carried fragments of truth through disaster. And before them, perhaps, the first civilization, whispering across the ages in geometry and stone. Every era thinks it's speaking for the first time, but in reality it's continuing a dialogue that began long before history began to write itself. The conversation starts in curiosity, that simple, almost childlike question. What is this and why does it exist? It's the same question that led the first humans to look at the stars, the same one that led ancient builders to carve rock into meaning, and the same one that leads modern scientists to peer into the universe. Curiosity is how the earth listens to itself through us. When we question the world, we're not standing outside it. We're part of its process of remembering. Each civilization adds its own vocabulary to this conversation. The first engineers spoke through structures, their grammar written in stone. The philosophers of Greece turned that grammar into logic. The scholars of the Middle Ages translated it into text. The scientists of the modern era express it in mathematics and experiment. And now our technology speaks in data, extending the conversation beyond the planet, out into the quiet vastness of space. The medium changes, but the intent doesn't. We're still trying to understand what the first builders might have understood, how to exist meaningfully in a universe that never stops moving. But conversation implies listening as much as speaking, and that's something our species often forgets. The ancients listened to the rhythm of seasons, the patterns of stars, the cycles of growth and decay. They learned from the landscape, adjusted to its moods, and built in harmony with its laws. Their communication with the earth was reciprocal. Somewhere along the way, that balance shifted. Our civilization speaks louder than any before, but listens less. We send signals constantly. Noise, light, industry, and yet the earth's voice grows harder to hear. Still, the conversation continues. The earth answers in its own language, in weather, in tides, in the chemistry of the air. It reminds us, gently at first and more firmly later, that communication must be mutual. Floods, fires, droughts, all are forms of response, feedback in a dialogue we've been having for millennia. The first civilization may have understood that silence and listening were part of survival. Perhaps that's why their works are so aligned with the planet's cycles, so tuned to its geometry. They weren't trying to conquer the earth, they were trying to stay in conversation with it. When modern scientists study those alignments, the way ancient structures point to the solstice sunrise or echo the orbit of the moon, they're not just measuring architecture, they're measuring communication. Each alignment is a sentence in a language built of observation. It says, we saw this pattern and we made ourselves part of it. That's what makes these monuments timeless. They aren't merely records of what people knew, they're demonstrations of how to listen. Sometimes, when you stand in such a place, at dawn on the equinox or beneath a night sky untouched by modern light, you can almost feel the conversation resume. The air carries a kind of recognition, as though the stones remember being understood. You realize that what feels ancient isn't the structure itself, but the act of noticing. The moment when a mind connects with the pattern of the world is always new, no matter how old the pattern is. That's why the conversation never ends. It's rediscovered every time someone looks closely enough to hear it. The dialogue doesn't just flow through history, it flows through individuals. Every person who looks up at the stars and feels wonder is continuing it. Every scientist who tests a theory, every artist who captures the shape of light, every child who asks why, they're all speaking the same language in different forms. Even when we don't realize it, we're responding to the same impulse that drove the first builders to align their monuments with the heavens. We're still saying, I see, I remember, I want to understand. If the first civilization truly existed, they might have known that the only way to make their message last was to weave it into the world itself. Not into fragile records, but into relationships between humans and earth, between thought and pattern. That's why their conversation survives. It's encoded in instinct, in geometry, in story. We may have forgotten their words, but we still speak their grammar. we still feel the pull to build, to explore, to measure, to connect the ground beneath our feet with the stars above our heads. Even our modern technologies, advanced as they seem, are echoes of their methods. When we send probes to other planets, we engrave symbols and star maps on their hulls. When we construct observatories, we align them with celestial bodies. When we design data networks, we model them after natural systems. Each is a continuation of the same pattern, translating the universe into meaning and reflecting that meaning back into form. The conversation expands, not through domination, but through resonance. It's easy to think of this dialogue as one-sided, as though we're the only ones speaking, but the planet participates too, in ways subtle and constant. The Earth answers our questions through evidence, fossils, strata, weather and life. Every discovery, every revelation is its response. When a scientist finds an ancient tool beneath layers of sediment, it's as if the Earth has handed over a memory saying, "You were here once. You've always been here." When a telescope captures the light of a star billions of years old, the universe itself is answering, "Yes, you are part of me." The conversation then isn't just between humans and the Earth, it's between intelligence and existence, between awareness and everything that sustains it. The first civilization might have seen that more clearly than we do. Their monuments suggest a worldview in which knowledge and reverence were the same thing. To understand the cosmos was not to dissect it, but to harmonize with it. They spoke to the universe through mathematics and balance, trusting that those principles would carry across time, the closest thing to a universal language we have. Perhaps that's the real message encoded in their works, that the universe is meant to be spoken with, not just studied, that to listen deeply is itself a form of participation. When the builders aligned their temples to stars, they weren't just observing the heavens, they were greeting them, continuing a dialogue that began when the first spark of awareness appeared on this planet. The silence that followed their fall was not the end of that conversation, just a pause. Every silence since has been another pause, a chance for the Earth to rest, for memory to gather its strength before speaking again. The searchers of today, the thinkers of tomorrow, the builders of whatever comes next, they are all parts of the same ongoing reply. In this sense, time doesn't break the conversation, it extends it. Each age speaks in the vocabulary available to it. The first civilization used stone and stars, we use data and machines, the next might use something we can't yet imagine. But the structure of the exchange, question, response, wonder, understanding, remains the same. It's the rhythm that holds civilization together across the long silences. There's something humbling in realizing that the Earth itself might be fluent in this language. The more we study ecosystems, the more we see that balance and feedback govern everything. Forests communicate through root networks. Rivers respond to rainfall in self-correcting patterns. Even the atmosphere adjusts to maintain equilibrium. Life and matter, in their own ways, are always conversing. We're simply one expression of that larger dialogue, the part of the planet that can ask out loud what it already knows in silence. That's why the study of the ancient world is never just about the past. It's about recognizing that we are participating in the same story, continuing the same questions. The builders of pyramids and the scientists mapping the cosmos are speaking across millennia in the same voice, the voice of curiosity, the voice of awareness reaching out to itself through time, and maybe somewhere far away in space the same thing is happening on another world, another intelligence, another planet engaging in its own version of the timeless conversation. If civilizations rise and fall everywhere as they do here, then the universe must be full of these quiet exchanges, worlds asking who they are, remembering themselves through the echoes of their own creations. When we send our signals into the cosmos, we're joining that chorus. We're not shouting into the void. We're speaking into an ongoing dialogue that has always existed. The message doesn't have to be complicated. It can be as simple as we are here, we are listening. That's what the first civilization might have been saying too, through their monuments, through their patterns, through the precision that still hums quietly beneath our feet. The timeless conversation doesn't require words. It happens through awareness itself, the act of noticing, of connecting, of caring enough to wonder. It moves through myth and science, through silence and noise, through destruction and renewal. It's what makes intelligence feel ancient even when it's new. It's what binds every age into one. When the first civilization fell silent, they didn't end the dialogue, they passed it forward. When we fall silent, we will do the same. The conversation will continue through whatever form the next awareness takes, whether human or something beyond, because the earth doesn't stop speaking and the universe doesn't stop answering. Perhaps that's the real immortality, not the survival of any unpeople or culture, but the persistence of the question itself, the question that has echoed since the first eyes looked at the stars. What are we part of? Every civilization asks it, every silence refines it, every rediscovery replies, and maybe when the next civilization rises and looks back at our ruins, they'll feel what we feel now, that faint familiar recognition, the sense that they've heard this voice before, even if they can't remember when. They'll add their own thoughts, their own discoveries, their own silences, and in that the conversation will remain timeless, never ending, never repeating, just deepening. Somewhere out there, in the long memory of the universe, the first question and the final answer might already exist, side by side, waiting for us to realize they've been the same thing all along. And the earth will keep listening as it always has, turning slowly beneath the stars, carrying every voice, every silence, every echo into the next dawn of understanding. Thank you so much for watching. See y'all in the next one video. If you like my channel, like and subscribe.